What is up, you savages? This is the Protect Your Neck podcast. I'm your host, Dan Tom, analyst whose work you could find over at MMAJunkie.com. But on this here program, the Protect Your Neck podcast, we break down high-level MMA, but we do it in a bit of a different way as I stumble there because it is a bit of a different time, right? Not to timestamp these shows too much, but yes, we are in the year of 2020. COVID-19 has kind of run a hamper in sports scheduling, and as it picks back up, figured we'll lean on the old top five format to kind of appreciate history, look back on some things. And for today's episode, which is going to be top five wrestlers from a standing position, I'll explain both the topic and the caveat in a moment. If you're watching on YouTube, you're like, why is this guy to Dan's to the left so quiet? That is Edward Gallo, Ed Gallo MMA, at Edward Gallo MMA. If you really want to follow him on Twitter, where he posts awesome wrestling stuff, as well as you can find his work for Bloody Elbow, MMA Sucka, as well as the Fight Site, thefight-site.com. What's up, Ed?
Not too much. You know how it is with the quarantines. I'm out in Philly, and a lot of stuff is shut down right now, but still got my little puppy dog, and we're hanging out, and we go on walks, and I was kind of a home buddy before this, so it's not a huge deal for me. I don't feel particularly oppressed right now.
Yeah, same here. Like outside of changes from obvious ones to personal ones, me personally, I've been as many people say in their profiles now, social distancing before it was cool. But glad to hear you and the pup are doing well. We were just speaking about that. I remember you picking up a pup not too long after I picked up one, so I'm glad to hear that's going well.
Yeah, it's going great. She's awesome.
Well, one thing that's common with MMA and dogs is or any a lot of animals from the MMA kingdom is wrestling, right? I think that is one thing. There's a common thread there. Dogs wrestle, gorillas wrestle, and of course, the crazy sport that we cover, mixed martial arts, there is wrestling in there. So we're going to be talking a lot about wrestling today, and that's kind of why, why specifically I wanted Ed on. I wanted to get Ed on anyways, but with these top five shows, peek behind the curtain, folks, I always try to give the ball to the court of my guests because, ideally you want your guest to be passionate about what we're going to talk about, right? And not only is Ed passionate, but he's much more knowledgeable than my dumb ass, pardon the French. There will be explicit on every episode, of course. But yeah, so I figured I'd bring Ed on here to help out and perhaps enlighten.
We'll see. I'm pretty dumb sometimes myself, so we'll find out what happens.
He's as self-deprecating as me, folks, so it's all good. Ed, you want to just give a brief, before we jump into the topic here, just give a brief background about yourself. Obviously, I mentioned the sites you write for, which are all great sites. You all should check out and support the people who write for them. But what's your background as far as where you came from to how you got into this crazy, like I said, crazy thing is covering MMA and writing about it?
Yeah, I don't think anyone has like a typical path to get to MMA. It's like a sport for weirdos and misfits, both media and competition. But for me, I just, I happened upon it on TV one day. I was like 16, 15, really thought that fighting looked cool and I wanted to do it. So that's actually why I started wrestling. I joined the wrestling team because it was free, relatively to, compared to gym fees. Wrestled for a little bit, not a long time. And I was like, I was JV. I wasn't good, wasn't winning matches really. I wasn't doing well in practice. So I wasn't a good wrestler at all. But I was in Pennsylvania. We were around a lot of good wrestling, so I had exposure, and I just found that I really liked the sport. While I didn't really like the team that I was on, I didn't really like the situation I was in right there, but I was like, the sport's great. So I continued to follow it, branched off and started training MMA because I did find some free outlets at school and later in college. So I ended up training MMA, the year after that and continuously since then. But wrestling was something I always, kept close to my heart because it was, my base. It was the thing that got me into, being athletic in the first place because I didn't do sports before that. I always thought that it was interesting. So I kept watching wrestling, and it's funny, like as I've gotten older, I've upgraded the level of wrestling that I am okay with watching. Like in high school, I didn't really watch college. I just watched high school. I just watched Pennsylvania high school wrestling because that's what I knew. And it's it's probably the best state in the country for that. So I wasn't getting anything good there. I'd watch PA states every year. Then I got to college. I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and they had a great D1 team. Still do. Went to every dual meet. So I got really into college wrestling, and then in the past couple of years, really I have to thank Seth Patera for this. Seth Patera got me into freestyle wrestling, and that's when I really started to lean into wrestling analysis when I started watching the very best in the world.
Yeah.
And now like everything else is ruined for me. I can't go back and watch high school now. I've seen Sajalayev. I can't. Like there's rare exceptions, where some guys are just transcendent, but for the most part, I still watch college. I still watch D1, and here or there a few other guys. But yeah, my background really is just studying MMA and studying wrestling. It's funny. I tell people this all the time. Like, I was watching MMA for since 2009, 2010, and it wasn't until like summer 2018 that I started to feel like I knew anything about it. You know what I mean? Like, I started to actually think about it analytically when I was writing my articles. I was like, oh, I get it. And but it's reading work of people like you and my colleagues at the fight site. Those are some of the best analysts I've ever witnessed in my life. You should see the conversations we have in our chats where like I'll bring up a topic and just off the top of their head, these guys are like giving away like premium article content for free. So being around a bunch of geniuses all the time definitely helped. But yeah, so I wrote for MMA Sucka for a couple of years. I wrote like well over 100 articles there. Found my way into Bloody Elbow because I don't know if you remember Coach Mike used to write those wrestling articles all the time.
Yeah,
and, he retired. We've talked a little bit about it, and he retired mostly due to burnout just because it is, unforgiving sometimes to be in this media space, not inherently rewarding for some people.
I was just about to say, in general, on a lot of levels, totally, yeah.
It's a ton of work, and there's not like any tangible payoff sometimes, so you gotta love it. But I do. So yeah, Bloody Elbow, and then recently, Kyle McLaughlin and a bunch of other guys at the fight site wanted to start our own space just because we felt like what we were doing was pretty unique, and there should be a site that focuses solely on analysis. So that's how we got together this past summer, and it's been a good 6-7 months now, and we're rolling. Technically, I'm one of the owners of the site. Me and Kyle run it together. But yeah, we're doing really great work over there, so I recommend everyone checks that out. I do write articles for the fight site a good deal, but not as often as Bloody Elbow, and I can't really say I contribute to MMA Sucka anymore, but I definitely still support the site, and I try to share the work that I've done in the past from there, because I did do some good stuff back then, and if anything new is coming out that I think is great, MMA Sucka is always picking up analysts who are starting out, so that's a good place to find hidden gems or people that are just getting going that are going to be cool later on. So that's kind of been my journey in a nutshell. There's more to it, obviously, but that's like the fastest way I can explain how I ended up here because it's crazy.
No, totally, and I'm not one to be shy about giving shouts to other sites. All those sites I got love for, but a special shout out though definitely to the fight site. I really love what you guys are doing over there. You're right, a bunch of smart individuals. I'm not, I always joke about myself being like an old man shouting on his lawn because I look younger than I am, but I'm actually older than what I technically am, if that makes any sense. Yeah. So I don't know half these references you kids be shouting, but no, you guys honestly, I love a lot of the subjects you guys are tackling, and I say that because even though everything I've dived into has been well worth it, everybody should go there. Again, that's thefight-site.com. But I take this as a compliment, but especially when you're producing content or you're within the same field, I'm very careful with people within the same field of digesting too much of their content, whether it's reading or audio or etc., whatever, right? Because you want to keep your filter clean, so to speak. So I got to be careful sometimes. Like I forget what it was. It was like the specialty articles on each fighter. And I think I was working on something on a particular fighter, and I'm like, oh, that sucks. I got to stay away from that because it's within something I'm writing about. But I'm like, but I really want to check that out because everything you guys have put out have been A+.
Is that like you don't want to feel like you're stealing ideas? Like you read something, you're like, oh, I should write that.
Well, you hear it in stand-up comedy a lot, right? Like some stand-ups won't listen to other comedians because even the best comedians, without the intention, the most honorable, etc., you won't realize subconscious is a really powerful thing. And, we talk about it a lot in fighting, right? You revert to certain styles, you revert to certain habits because subconscious is a super powerful thing. And you will start sounding, whether it's cadence, definition of words, writing styles. It's happened to me before. I've seen it happen to others for sure, and it's just something you got to, I think, be aware of because again, I don't think most people are twiddling their mustache and trying to do what's this reference I'm trying to think of, but plagiarism or anything like that. Or I really don't think anything's intentional, but because crossover is really common, great minds often do think alike. That's a common thing for a reason.
Oh man, I have the fortune of not fully understanding everything I read, so I don't internalize it that way. So I probably don't have that problem, but I haven't been thinking about that. So hopefully, I don't do that.
But that's the point about. But that's the point about reading, right? Because then it makes you. At least for me, I'm one of those people. Like, whether I finish an article, book, or movie, I have to immediately go reference everything I didn't understand. I have to go study it. Mm-hmm. It's like this whole other process. It's really annoying. Like with my completist mentality. And as far as writing goes, because I'm always trying to improve as a writer, I say in air quotes, I'm a writer, as I don't consider myself one. Always trying to improve, right? And what do? You read really good writers, right? Like the Chuck Mindenhalls or the Ben Folks of the world. True. More specifically, I'll try to read writers outside the MMA space, and then that will inherently kind of improve. So, again, there's benefits to both people. I'm not saying there's not, but it's one of those things I'm weirdly, careful about. But you guys do great work, so.
Thanks, man.
All right, man. We're going to be talking about top 5 wrestlers from a standing position as we're about 10 minutes in here. Basically, for one, Ed, I'm glad that you wanted to narrow this down because, boy, I had a hard enough time with this list, as I'm sure you did. But now I'm like, I am so glad we're going to, probably do top 5 wrestlers or top 5 clinch fighters probably, and then maybe do a top 5 mat wrestlers, right, or a top 5 top position. Anyways, I'm going to dissect it into probably at least 3. And I'm glad for doing so. Was this as hard for you as it was for me, Ed?
Yeah, especially because I picked it because I prefer breaking down, dissecting, watching wrestlers to excel from the neutral position. That's what you call it in wrestling, top, bottom, neutral. So neutral being standing. But yeah, I mean, it's always takedowns are the most interesting thing to me. Takedowns, takedown defense, scrambles, things like that. So I was like, well, I just want to talk about the thing I like the most. Mat wrestling is super important and super cool, and it's a very important skill to have in MMA. But I just maybe it's my ADD. That's probably it, where I have a harder time sitting down and watching a lot of grappling and a lot of mat wrestling and trying to break it down because I'm like, oh my god, when I have to watch the whole thing and wait for stuff to happen. With takedowns and these sequences, you can be skipping ahead every 5 seconds until you skip ahead and suddenly they're grappling. You're like, okay, something happened there. And then I'll go back, after that and be like, okay, were there signs of this being set up over time? So just so everyone knows, I'm not totally cheating on my analysis. But I do not have the attention span to really watch a lot of mat wrestling, which is crazy because I watch a lot of college wrestling, which is a lot of mat wrestling, more than in freestyle for sure, and more than MMA. But it's just, for some reason, it's different then. But yeah, I definitely wanted to do it for that reason. And that's why it's so hard, is because that's what I focus on all the time. I have so many examples in my head of people who are really good at it. And then I'm like, oh my God, how do I choose? I think I feel pretty good about my thought process here, but and I did double check with some people who think like I do. I'm like, if I'm using this criteria, what do you think of this list? And they felt good about it. But yeah, I feel like I'm betraying the people that aren't going to make my top 5.
Yeah, me too. That's something too. I'm glad that you mentioned scrambles because that does fit. Even if I do decide to do a top 5 scramblers list down the line, I don't think it'll interfere or there will be really too much crossover with this list that I'm going to be having today. And that was something that also helped me parse the list, was thinking in context of, okay, I may be crucified for having this person but not having this person, but this person for sure is going to be in my top 5 clinch fighters, regardless if I limit it to wrestlers or shootbox tie clinch guys as well. This person's still going to be there, or this person's not on here, and here's another champion. For example, there's 2 champions, current champions, and top greats, that aren't going to be on today's list that I could be crucified for. But, one will be on the clinch and one would definitely be a shoo-in for a very top of the list for the mat, so it's so if you don't hear a name, at least from my side of it, I can't speak for Ed. I can assure you if there's an obvious name left out, it's going to be, on a specific section. And scrambling did give points for certain people on this list for sure. And scrambling as well gives context to certain things. Like there's certain moves like out of context, like a Peterson roll might be more considered mat wrestling, but in an example for a person I'm going to cite, I would argue it takes place within a scramble of a takedown. And
Gotcha.
you know, someone who uses that, I feel like we're still we're dancing on the outskirts of this topic, but that's about where I cut it off. Any kind of you know how in MMA fights, especially the much more educated commentators, much more educated audience in our sport, when there'll be a takedown, especially you'll hear DC or Cruz go, "That wasn't a takedown. He got right back up." While statisticians will still mistakenly overcredit takedowns, I would argue, if you're looking at it from a wrestling standpoint.
For sure.
Or collegiate rules or many other rule sets, right, Ed? But you know, but yeah, I consider that whole kind of neutral space, you could argue, right? Because both fighters are still scrambling and fighting in mid-action, defensive and offensive. That's kind of where I guess I cut off the nether region if we're really splitting hairs with this topic.
For sure. It's funny. This isn't relevant really to what we're going to be saying moving forward, but just on the topic of scoring takedowns, it's funny. In freestyle, it's really hard to get something called a takedown, but it's really easy to score points. And in folk style, it's really easy to get something called a takedown, like just by criteria, but it's actually very hard to score points. It's so funny. Like, like if you hit a go behind, you're standing and they're like standing and you didn't return them to the mat, a lot of refs will call that a takedown. In freestyle, you have to, not only do you have to, have control, you also have to have like besides the feet, like additional points of contact. So if they're on their hands and their feet, that's not a takedown. You have to break them down to their elbow or their knee or something like that. So it's like, but then, in folk style, you see all these crazy scrambles where people are rolling across their back and leg passing and funk rolling. That's all fine. And it's all intermediate and there's no takedown, there's no points. In freestyle, every single time your back exposes to the mat is 2 points. If it happened from the feet, it's 4. So it's like the way that's scored is so crazy. And then in MMA, it's like, I would say, even the most difficult to score out of all of them because nothing inherently scores, right? If you read the rules, it's not like taking someone down isn't worth anything. It's what you do once you take them down.
Right.
Unless it's like a damaging takedown. So should they even be scoring takedowns? Probably not. Like they shouldn't be counting them. What's the point of keeping record of it if it's not actually a scoring move? If that makes sense, it's so funny. So, I'm devaluing our topic for some reason, but I don't know. I just want to get that out there.
Well, no, totally. I mean, in other sports that have takedowns, people don't realize, like maybe certain instances of Muay Thai, right? They're not necessarily scoring points, getting points awarded for it or anything like that. But they use it for what obviously wrestlers or you hear commentators kind of in MMA stereotyping on wrestlers as far as bringing the grind in a mental sense because that's the Muay Thai way of saying kind of F you and the Muay Thai way of establishing dominance, like no selling, so it's funny when you get into these arguments as far as how takedowns can be scored in combat sports, I guess is why I bring that up. But no, I love what you said about the comparison. That's really interesting because when I go back, and I'll admit I don't keep up with it today. If I'm watching collegiate, it's because I'm on some kind of rabbit hole, like on some sorts, or like I did a article on when I worked for Flo on Chad Mendes, so I went back and watched his collegiate stuff, or Askren, I went back and watched his collegiate stuff a couple times, right? And excuse me, I have some coffee here. And it's always funny. The funny thing I noticed in regards to the points, and as far as why, your point, it's so hard to get those points. It makes sense because it seems like almost all wrestlers, or the good ones, and all the coaches, they all have that. If I'm going to use NBA terminology, the players have a bit of Dennis Rodman, and the coaches have a bit of Stan Van Gundy in them. As far as they're always playing to the refs. As far as hey, wasn't that a point? You see them check and look to the ref like, hey, shouldn't that? The chaos will happen, like you said, right? And when there's a little breather or a little beat in the action, you'll see someone contesting if there wasn't a call when they thought they should have been. And that, right or wrong, that seems to be a common play, right? Or is that just me having selective memory here?
For sure. And some people more than others, obviously. And some people have styles where it, happens more often where things are contentious. That's like Johnny Hendricks was famous for that in college, for playing with the refs.
Yeah, man, and often the greats do, man. And that's something that I believe it was. I'll credit him anyways because he's awesome. But Connor Rebush always says, I believe. He might have had an article on it as far as the greats fighting dirty, and I think that translates to all sports.
Yeah,
he was
for sure.
he was talking about MMA and I believe probably combat sports, but it's funny how that translates almost to all sports and their branches, right? So, all right. So that's the context of the list. Don't crucify me too hard. I am going to have one really hipster pick coming in hot for my number 5, as I usually do. Usually I let the guests go first, but Ed, do you want me to kickstart the momentum since it's your first time on the show, and we'll go from there?
Yeah, go for it. And mine's hipster too, so we're starting off on a sour note either way. So you go for it.
So my hipster pick is a Brazilian, and again, if we're stereotyping your nation with your martial art, you're not going to really get wrestling for Brazil. Or when you get the seldom guy, who comes in like, was it? I believe one of his names was Henrique da Silva or something, the guy that got knocked out by Ngannou. Like, if you follow their wrestling credentials, I'm sure they don't rank too highly if I talk to an Ed Gallo of the world, for example. But there is one Brazilian that I think you're going to have, so I stayed away. Even though I'm a big fan of defense, so I went with another Brazilian, and it feels like a crime to put a guy who wears a gi, which I guess we'll page note that wears a gi on a wrestling list. But if guys like Ben Askren are giving you credit for your wrestling, then it is really hard to deny this man is Demian Maia. And Demian Maia, this sounds, I know, don't crucify me. He is a jiu-jitsu person, and if we were doing top 5 jiu-jitsu fighters, you probably would crucify me for like putting him on because it's so damn obvious, right? And I'm not going to talk about his mat wrestling, his mat jiu-jitsu, his chokes, or anything like that. But I'm mainly putting Demian Maia on here. You can crucify me, like, his shot was decent. His shot was probably pretty good considering his age and his discipline. And that's for a reason, is because he left Brazil, went to the United States, New Jersey, actually worked in wrestling programs, put the work in, and you can kind of see it through his MMA career. And we're in his jiu-jitsu, he's tapping heavyweights with triangle arm bars, and the younger jiu-jitsu, Maia probably has healthier knees back then, which I can relate to. But as he got older, he became more of a wrestler. And even though he's known for his jiu-jitsu, he didn't start in jiu-jitsu, for people that aren't aware. He actually started in karate and judo, which is why if you look at him operated in the clinch, and again, I'm not focusing on the clinch here because that doesn't qualify him on the list. That's not what we're covering. But Ed, you can weigh in on interrupt me on this rant here as I throw to you, but what he does in the clinch, and I credit it to his judo and karate because both of those martial arts, albeit one a grappling and one not, they both rely on the symbiotic relationship between your limbs, your arms and your legs. Now, if we break it down from a literal standpoint, if from bad fighters to good fighters, regardless of discipline, everyone's forced to use their arms and legs, Dan. What the hell are you talking about? But Ed, as you can talk about with Demian Maia, MMA, or wrestlers, there are certain people who are above the fold when they are using their arms and their legs. They might be doing different things. The arms might be distracting up here while the legs are accomplishing the task, but they are both working toward the same objective. And you see a lot of that smooth, symbiotic nature with Demian Maia's movement. You know what I'm talking about, Ed?
Yeah. I define neutral wrestling as, the space between when top and bottom is established. So it's like anything that's happening from the transition of when a takedown attempt starts or anything like that. That's all neutral wrestling. So Demian Maia is super effective at taking people down, and it's funny. Fight site plug already. Our guy Tom Elliott, who's a BJJ black belt, and I think also a judo black belt. I think he was D1 in college for judo. Very accomplished martial artist. Now he's taking amateur Muay Thai fights. I hate this guy.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
he's out there talking about his age on Twitter. By the way, shouts to Tommy.
Oh yeah, we love you, Tommy. Yeah, but he wrote we did like 3 or 4 articles in a row in the lead up to Askren versus Maia because it was such a talked about fight in both of our spaces. But yeah, he did a Demian Maia versus Wrestlers article, and it's basically about Demian Maia's wrestling, and he gives him so much credit. And I read the whole thing, and I was like, wow, I'd seen I knew some of it because I watched a lot of Maia for a Jorge Masvidal takedown defense, wrestling in general article. But yeah, and Maia was really impressing me because his setups are not ideal. because a lot of the time he's dive bombing on legs. But it's the fact that he has this process for how he knows how to finish shots, and then when he gets into these wrestling situations, like he's in front headlock, he's hitting go behinds, like the guy can flat out wrestle. He can flat wrestle, and it's really cool because that's something, like you said, it happened over time. It's something he learned how to do, and like you can watch him fight wrestlers and do very well at wrestling. I think the Jake Shields fight is probably my favorite for like just as a whole. Maya's like overall grappling ability, including wrestling. But yeah, I think that's an awesome shout. I'm like so prejudiced against people who don't have like clean technique. Like if there's a extended struggle between the initiation of the takedown and getting it, I'm like, can I really count you then? I like things to be pretty. It's the freestyle influence on me right now. But yeah, I love that.
I know what you mean. There were certain guys that I don't know if they would have made the list, but I definitely wanted to shout. And I went back and watched. I'm like, ooh, like there was that exact instance where I'm like, I'm not seeing chain offs, but like also this guy was from an earlier era, so I'm like, how hard can I really judge him? And we'll talk about those contexts as well. But just to finish up on Maia specifically, or not just his shot or what he did in the clinch, but it was the in between. And I know, speaking of giving stuff for free, I probably should have done a half guard article the other day. But I went on this half guard rant on Twitter, right? And at Dan Tom MMA, if you want to track it down, click media, scroll down, it's probably not too far from whenever you're listening to this. And amidst it was, of course, I had to build toward a Big Nog and Demian Maia connection too. Like it didn't matter if he had a good shot or not because he took on the Big Nog cue. Big Nog and Pride, folks, he would shoot shitty shots. And people will be like, haha, I sprawled. Your shot was shit. I just thwarted your grappling, big boy. What are you going to... And literally, did he know? It's like, no, you're an idiot. Sprawling on top of me is still grappling with me. Watch. Here's a half guard pull. Now you're fucked. And it was beautiful. And Demian Maia picked up on this, and he would use that too. Now, I'm not even going to include half guard pull as far as, crediting him to why he gets on this list. But what would he pull to, Ed? It was the single leg. Now, there are certain specifics, like if you're a southpaw, you need to have a good check right hook. Now, whether you're a wrestler or a jiu-jitsu guy learning wrestling, it doesn't matter. If you're an MMA fighter, you should be familiar with all iterations of the single leg. And Demian Maia, through most of his welterweight catalog, will take you through from your back to dominant wrestling positions, clean entries, unclean entries where you have to adjust. He will take you through all those iterations on a single leg. And most importantly, the reason why is because even if you're not going to be a half guard puller or a guy who's good from deep half, or even if your wrestling is not your moneymaker, you're going to be a defensive sprawl and brawler. When you get into the craziness of a scramble, which you can't avoid in MMA, you get knocked down, taken down or something, right? Someone's going to get through. Something's going to get through. What is one of the ways, especially under today's rules, to protect yourself? You go in for a single. It doesn't matter that I don't have a good single. I'm going to hide my head, because when you go in for a signal and you hide your head into the crotch, unless you're extremely homophobic, what you're going to do is only expose illegal areas to hit. It's very brilliant. And more so specifically, you look at Demian Maia and how he uses it. He'll kind of go under the ass more for a single leg. And it's opposite from jiu-jitsu style. Jiu-jitsu guys preach high underhooks. High underhooks are great for a lot of things, and they're not necessarily bad for a get-up. However, what is the counter? And Demian Maia knows this counter because he's a jiu-jitsu guy. It is Darce chokes and guillotines to the half-guard get-up. So if you go below the ass and you grab below the ass and your underhook get-ups on your single legs, you are going to nullify about 90% of that, because they're going to have to debase and almost get themselves off balance to get a deep darcing or guillotine arm. Demian Maia knew this. People always took the bait. They didn't know how to react, good grapplers or not, and Demian Maia would not just get the takedown, but what he would do with the takedowns made his takedowns more emphatic. So he's got to make this list for me. So sorry for the Demian Maia fandom rant there, but
I like it. In terms of efficacy, that's a cool shout. Spoilers, I didn't even think about him. I was like, didn't even cross my mind. But yeah, that's awesome. That's really good. I'm proud of that pick.
The hipster pick is in. Throw your stones as I divert the attention to Ed while I make my getaway. Ed, what was your number 5?
Well, here's my hipster pick. So another grappler, maybe someone that not everyone's familiar with, but someone I am absolutely in love with. His name is Ali Bagov. and he was ACA's
Wow.
lightweight champion, and that he was formerly ACB's lightweight champion. So if you know ACB,
Yep.
Ramzan Kadyrov's WCFA, WFCA, I forget, purchased ACB, and now it is ACA Absolute Championship Akhmat. So Ali Bagov was lightweight champ, and he's a guy who I definitely wrote a very long article about for the fight site. So if you look up his name on the fight site, you'll find my article. But his background is no-gi grappling. He won a FILA World Championship, which is not really anything, and now that's UWW, so formerly FILA. But he won a wrestling organization no-gi grappling World Championship. I think guys like Brian Caraway and I don't know some other
Yep.
American UFC names, guys like that compete at that stuff, and he won twice perhaps. I forget what weight classes, but so he came into MMA as pretty much a pure grappler, but his neutral game's always been great. In his fourth MMA fight, I believe it was Khabib's seventh or eighth fight, he fought Khabib, and he took him down right away. So that was the first thing that happened. So this guy, how do I describe his neutral game? It's gone through several stages of evolution. He's always had a great double leg, and a lot of this is qualified by him being, one, freakishly athletic, and two, just huge, so big. He moved up to welterweight for his last fight, and he was still too big. He looked too thick. He was too thick to function. It was a terrible fight because he was too thick to function. So let's just ignore the welterweight version of Ali Bagov and just think of all the lightweight versions we know of him, and just pretend that fight didn't happen.
It's thick enough at 155, Ali. You're thick enough, buddy.
Yeah, he's freaking enormous, cutting from probably 200 pounds. That's why his kidneys failed, and he had to move up.
Sorry, I'm laughing at that. Sorry.
In terms of people who existed at lightweight as a wrestler, Ali Bagov is one of my favorites, and just an incredible double leg, and he can shoot it from a relatively close space and run it, and he usually likes to run to the cage. Running to the cage is a great option for him because he has such limb control that he can do probably my favorite double leg adjustment finish, because the defense to a double leg against the cage is to get side on and get your stance as wide as possible, dig those underhooks, wizard to pull them up, stuff like that. For Ali Bagov, he's getting in deep on those legs, and if they're too wide, he'll pull off to the side and he'll run it straight again. And while you're trying to defend and run it, you can't widen your base while you're trying to defend backwards. You have to keep your feet moving backwards and your hips moving backwards so you don't get knocked over. So if he's running them into the cage again, and just short distances, and that's narrowing their base, and he can finish the double there. So he's great at that. And then when he started training with Abdul Manaf and Khabib, he learned the cage control system and the leg mount and all that stuff. And he's gotten terrifying because of that, because he's so good at finishing on the cage. But the double leg's amazing. He can shoot it from pretty much anywhere and get you to the cage and finish it, which makes him qualify for the list already. But he actually developed a little setup system, very simplistic, and something that most people aren't able to do physically, which is why it's not really something that it's it's so simple. It's no, it's simple for him. He can do it. You probably can't do it. But his thing is his whole striking game is completely wacky. This guy pretty much only uses his lead hand and lead leg. I don't know where this came from, but he is extremely uncomfortable throwing his rear hand and rear leg. He almost never does it. One of our patrons at the fight site, a great guy, Miguel Klaas, said his left hand is for stabbing and his right hand is for grabbing. And I think that is the most apt, funniest thing I've ever heard about Ali Bagov. But yeah, he basically uses only lead hand strikes, and basically when he's not ready to engage in grappling, he's check hooking and jabbing to get you to stay at range or fend you off. But otherwise, he's lead leg kicking, and his entry is skip up, lead leg high kick, drop into the double leg off the lead leg high kick, which is a very athletic thing to do.
Yeah.
Another ACA guy, Rustam Karimov, the former bantamweight champion, vacated. He has one where he did rear leg head kick, and then immediately off the head kick, drop back into stance, huge level change into the doubles. These guys are just absurd athletes, which makes them very effective takedown artists. But Ali Bagov's double leg is awesome. He just has this weird depth of takedowns from neutral. He's really good at this. He'll go single leg, just snatch single, head inside, shelf that, transition off to the seat belt. And he's really good from the seat belt. He can go body lock and throw you. He can just kind of trip out that base leg. He can, transition to the back. He's also really good going from that snatch single. He can run the pipe, and I love guys who run the pipe
Yeah.
on singles in MMA because singles are so hard to finish in MMA because people just go to the
Yes.
cage and what do I do? Shout out to Khabib for being like one of the only guys who can finish singles in the cage. But yeah, Ali Bagov likes to just run the pipe, and basically when you get the pipe ran on you in MMA, you end up hands and knees or hands and feet, so you can base and turn back in because they're just kind of throwing you down and you have to recover. Against Edward Vartanian, who's somebody I wanted to put on this list but didn't. Edward Vartanian right away closes the distance, snatch single, runs the pipe, gets to the back, chokes him unconscious in the first round. This is a guy that people are talking about as the best lightweight in the world right now. Not like most people, but some people are talking about that. He choked him to sleep. Just that the variety of neutral offense is something that's really amazing, and just how unstoppable it can be at times. He's taken down pretty much everyone he's fought, including guys like Khabib, Edward Vartanian. Another new name for some people would be Abdulaziz Abdulwahab, who is not the current lightweight champion. So he was lightweight champion after he beat Vartanian, and then Bagov beat him in an epic fight.
Okay, now I know you're familiar. Yeah, I was familiar with Vartanian. Now I'm familiar. Yeah.
This is the lineage. He beat him in an epic fight.
This is about where I started falling out from ACB, ACA. And a lot
me
of the
too.
Russian,
It was a mistake.
Russian scenes. I know it was. It totally was. And now, I figured I could use this time to catch up. And I will. I actually wrote Ali Bagov article down here because guilty admission. I missed that, and I'm definitely gonna go and read that. But if I could just jump in real quick, man.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think this is a great shout. Ali Bagov. I know I always joke about Khabib not fighting really much anybody from compiled record to. If you go back to watch the fights, obviously I'm not talking about Ali Bagov. And by the way,
say something about that in a second.
Yeah. By the way, and I don't want to say no one talks about this or anything like this, but you don't hear it talked about enough. I guess is a good way to phrase it. Is Khabib's guard work? I mean, I remember first trying to dig at him, who is this guy that's so touted? He won a couple fights in the UFC at this point. And remember tracking down some fights on the internet and then just watching how he would go from parlaying attacks to sweeps. You only see a little bit in it briefly in the Abel Trujillo fight as far as UFC career goes. But that was kind of the cool thing about watching this era of Khabib. Sorry, side shout on that. But also a really good detail on Ali Bagov on that double leg as far as the defense. And now that I think about it, as you're explaining it, I'm yeah, totally, that's great, A. But B, why don't guys do that more? Because, I've even seen uglier versions of that work. Remember, didn't, Paul Daly do that over and over again to Jorge Masvidal in, shark fights back in the day when it was, it was first Paul Daly's, first trying to, working with Kenny Johnson, I'm going to try to apply some wrestling. And that fight, he wins it against the cage. It's ugly. But, you even see, the point is, you even see, non-wrestlers doing ugly versions of almost kind of running laterally after they've gotten a certain reaction off the double leg. I'm surprised we don't see it from technical finishes to just brute ones. I'm surprised we don't see that attempted more.
Yeah, it's tough because I'm sure your arms are getting tired in that position and you don't feel like doing it, so you just rise up into the clinch and say F it. But yeah, it's a thing. Funny you say Khabib versus Ali Bagov is a thing that counts. Ali Bagov was really flawed. He's still flawed, but he was extremely flawed at the time because he's still very uncomfortable on his feet. He let it bother him that he was uncomfortable on his feet before. He would freak out.
It looked like
he didn't have the mentality. So he got that first takedown, and Khabib used that leg entanglement system on the bottom to scramble and get up. And he took him down a couple more times, and it just became very obvious to him early on that he wasn't going to be able to hold him down, or at least it was going to take more attempts to hold him down. His cardio wasn't really holding up, and he was oh man, what do I do? And he started spazzing and pulling guard, and it's a really ugly fight on his part after that initial sequence. So that's why his record is so bad. Is because for a long time he didn't know how to make these immense skills work, because the things he was good at, he's incredibly good at, and that's always been there. But he's how do I fix this? And I think that's what happened is he said, I don't care that I'm not good at striking, and I shouldn't care about it. And what I'm going to do is just immediately take people down, and I'm not going to stop trying to take them down. I'm just going to do the damn thing. So that's basically what he did. He threw out almost everything from his striking game and just focus on the stuff that sets up his takedowns, and it works brilliantly. He just specialized even more, and that's kind of the thesis of the article. Here is how he became good. And then I think the end point is like I think he's gone too far. Like, I think he went a little bit away from the stuff that got him to his peak, and maybe he's taken too much from like Khabib and Abdulmanap. Where my favorite thing about him as a grappler, and maybe this would fit into the mat wrestling, maybe it wouldn't. He's someone that passes guard so aggressively, constant guard passing and like immediate guard passing. He's hitting these really explosive athletic takedowns where he's ending up in elevated positions because people are like being blown into their backs. So they're like, oh, butterflies. To try to elevate him, and then he's using that elevation because he's got like body locks, posts, overhooks, and whatever he's got off the double. But he's finding ways to elevate his hips and hop over, and he's really good at like stack passing and all this crazy stuff. But he's like pass immediately, side control, armbar, and just like stuff like that. Like he's a very, if you're a jiu-jitsu purist, I think you'll really enjoy watching him, despite me bringing him up on a wrestling list. But yeah, as a neutral takedown artist, he's awesome. It's just like the times that it hasn't gone that well is versus guys who did not die immediately after he took him down the first time, and they said, okay, you don't have the energy just to bulldoze me immediately again, so I get a little more time here. But the thing that I think qualifies him for the list the most is because his level of competition that he's doing this to, which is a silly thing to say from the perspective of someone that doesn't watch these guys, so they don't know that these guys exist. Because if you have watched the UFC mostly, every once in a while you'll catch like Bellator, PFL, something like that. You might watch the undercard and be like, okay, these guys are good, but I can tell the average level maybe isn't where it is in the UFC.
Yeah.
ACA is a very strange place, and ACP is a very strange place because you still get that. Because you'll still like watch an undercard and you'll be like, some of these guys are just flat bad. But there's like an embarrassment of riches if you just take like the top 5-10 of every division, like let's say middleweight down. These guys are crazy good. It's stupid. It's stupid how good they are. They're all super good at everything. It's messed up. So
totally. Like you want to talk about like not offensive, but like just using it defensive so he can slug people like Oleg Borisov.
Oh my god,
tank that somehow started I remember when he first started cutting like 135. I was like, oh my goodness, and he just would deaden people. But like you just see him like people will have the position and almost like take him off of his hips midair as like a double leg, and he'll just kind of hit. You'll see his hips rotate midair. He's almost at a 45 as he's falling down, but he's rotating the guys over with pure hip strength. Just sick stuff. And there's like a bunch of those guys that are like unheralded over there, to your point. And to your point about Ali Baghoff, rounding it back to him. And I think ACA, ACB especially exemplifies the unkind matchmaking that can go on over there. And there's a lot of that. And Ali Baghoff is subject to that because, again, whether they are putting you in there to lose, or even if they're putting you in there to win, for better or worse, there's an argument, especially if you look at a guy like Ali Baghoff, these guys are getting put in there a lot just to accrue experience. Yeah.
It was cool. They did more recently, like once they merged the organizations, they did a title unification fight with him and Hussein Khaliev, who was the champion for WFCA, who was also amazing. Ryan Wagner wrote the article on him, so Ryan wrote the ones on Khaliev and Edward Vartanian. Sriram Muralidharan wrote the one on Abdul Vakaba. I wrote the one on Bagov. I'm supposed to write the one on Yusuf Raisov, who's also amazing. I haven't done that yet. Danny Martin did one on Alexander Shabli, who is not in ACA any longer, but he's like one of like the four kings of the Russian lightweights, basically. But check these guys out. Just watch any of their fights, really, and you'll be like blown away. Read the articles probably, because that's a better sense to get like a big picture. But I don't want to rant about ACA that much longer.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
Just trust me that the level of competition is insane. And if you are a wrestling person listening to this, Ali Baghoff fought Bubba Jenkins, and Ali Baghoff is not used to people trying to take him down. So he did get taken down pretty early on. He got doubled. It was cool. But he messed up Bubba from guard, and then the second round, he came out and he took him down a bunch of times and just ragdolled him and made him embarrassed and put him to sleep with like a really not tight looking like a reverse triangle off the back, but put him out. So watch that fight if you're a wrestling person. You wouldn't be impressed by him taking down a really good wrestler. But Abdul Wahab is more than good enough to watch him take down. But yeah, that's my number 5 is Ali Baghoff, and I feel very confident that he belongs on a top 5.
Yeah, no, and no worries on the ACA shots. Real quick, do you have anybody else from that over there that's going to be on this list?
No, that's it.
I will say, who's one of my favorites, and I forgot to. He wouldn't. I don't know if he would have made the list, but he would have been right up there. Murat Belayev, just because he's just the crazy from prison Russian Darren Elkins.
Prison dad.
Yeah, just speaking of Rise Off and those guys, good stuff over there. And last note, in case anybody's listening who is much more educated than me on that, I've always noticed that about you were speaking about Ali Bagov's lead left side. Obviously, he's on one clear end of the spectrum where he's only doing it, but in general, and I'm not even talking about Wushu Sanda guys, maybe more specifically with Eastern European kickboxers, we'll see like Polish. Polish MMA or kickboxers do it too. Like something about that region, something about punctuating, finishing, and emphasizing the lead side of their stance. I don't know what it is. It's like a common thread. Rashid Magomedov's really balanced. If you really watch, he makes his money off of his lead side. So I don't know what that is, but good note.
I love
there.
him.
Yep, me too. All right, number 4. Back to the wrestlers from a standing position. That was a fun sidetrack. It's cool to be able to go off on that. Number 4, I'll keep the steering wheel. We'll do a Chinese fire drill on the next one. There might be crossover here. I'll admit, he was on this list last minute because I was trying to parse out, but that doesn't make him any less. Again, I'm putting him over Demian Maia. He is an actual wrestler. You can come correct me on the credentials. I'm a great podcast host. Clearly, I don't have him in front of me. But I believe he was an All-American. But more specifically, Frankie Edgar was one of the guys who really, in the mid to late aughts, we start seeing, and I'll burn a name here because I don't think he's going to be on your list. I apologize. But we start seeing guys like Rashad Evans who inspire his teammates who I won't name because his teammates probably will be on the list. And it's like this era of we're attaching, not only are we actually moving our head, you're starting to see like the first semblances of head movement in MMA, but we're going to attach head movement and level changes from a boxing sense, and we're going to parlay these right into wrestling because not just that movement of changing a level, right? Changing a level for a double or changing a level to go to the body in boxing, but even the footwork, which we'll get to with other examples, especially my next example more specifically, there are a lot of common threads with boxing and wrestling that I'm not sure, it's commonly known. And Frankie Edgar was one of the guys who was really polishing this style off fluidly, whether you were overextending on a hook, throwing a kick from the body to the leg that that wasn't perfect. He was going to make you pay for it. And not only was he going to change his level to take you down, he was going to do, one of my biggest fans is re-wrestling. I was terrible at shooting, right? We're talking about running the pipe, and you're giving me nightmares. Shout out to my late, great coach. Can I go like a podcast without shouting out a dead coach? Brian Keck yelling at me, hike the football, we're going to be talking more about snap downs and running the pipe. But one thing, I was so terrible in the wrestling classes, right? Like my shot was the worst thing. Wrestling was my weakest. Which is crazy because when I actually grappled, one of the best compliments I would get is someone would go, hey, you used to wrestle? Because, again, if we're talking about mat wrestling, my mat wrestling was really good. This wrestling we're talking about, Ed, fucking awful, right? So it took me a while, but I figured out whether it was novice wrestlers or good wrestlers because they all wiped the floor with me. I stood my best chances in getting into my entries when I re-wrestled. When I learned the theory of re-wrestling, counter-wrestling, counter-shooting, right? Whenever someone would shoot, my defense was really strong and natural, but it was reshooting. And Frankie Edgar could reshoot just as well, even off of a failed or partially hit shot. You go back, you watch the later rounds when he fought Uriah Faber. Uriah was really good at rolling with the momentum, right? He would even give his back turtle tripod up to stand because he knew how to do it. And what did Frankie do? He didn't get discouraged by that. In fact, he stayed in on the hips and he re-wrestled and would just dump him forward, go deep in on the hips and dump him forward head first and just make him repost, rebalance, rework to get back to the feet. And you want to talk about a honey badger in the sense of this topic, wrestlers from a standing position. There was a lot of guys I wanted to talk about, maybe a Sean Shirk. I'll burn his name because I don't think he's going to get mentioned here. But they get knocked off for one reason or the other, and a lot of roads lead to Frankie Edgar for me.
Yeah. I definitely considered it. I did write a big wrestling article on Edgar. That's a wrestling for MMA article. So your original point there with how boxing and wrestling connect and how striking and wrestling connect, that's like what it was about, like how Edgar was setting up his takedowns. I forget what brought it up, but I guess we were just talking about double legs. Someone who has really beautiful footwork on their double legs is Frankie Edgar. I mean, that's always been striking to me. One, how he can scramble like in like a flat wrestling sense. When I say scrambling, I'm sorry if this is a spoiler at all for your list.
No,
Not for mine.
Go.
Yeah, when people talk about scrambling in MMA, everyone thinks Joe Benavidez, where he's already in like he's been taken down into a dominant position. He's like finding ways out of them and creating these scrambles. Edgar, it's just like the wrestling situation begins and he hustles. It's like you said, it's re-wrestling. It's going from position to position. Like that's something that always blows me away. For me, I guess the reason why he didn't make it was just because his later career sticks out in my mind where his entries like stop being effective. Like he's getting to these entries, but like against Cub Swanson in the rematch, he went like 0 for 9, and it was really jarring to see because he's always been such an effective wrestler, and I'm like, what is going on here? So that's no reason to leave him off the list, but just like that somehow disqualified him because it was so close for me. I was like, oh, whatever. But yeah, I love Edgar's wrestling for MMA, and I definitely wrote a big old article about it. So that's just to prove that I agree with you. But yeah, and he's a great one. He was not an All-American. He was also wrestling up a weight class because Rad Martinez, if you remember him, he fought in Bellator.
Yeah.
Was at 133, and that was Edgar's weight. And he was better than him, so Edgar had to bump up. He had a few good NCAA tournaments. That's actually the beginning of the article. If you look at that, I just kind of break down what happened at his NCAA trips. But yeah, he might have been round of 12 at some point. But yeah, he did an AA. But yeah, a couple-time NCAA qualifier. But he was in high school senior nationals. I think he made the finals as a senior. So that was pretty cool. And Jersey's super tough for wrestling. So if you're making states, placing at states, that's a big deal.
Jersey.
I'm like a day one Frankie Edgar stan. I've moved on to other things, but that was like my original guy that I was hardcore about.
Now, I know what you mean, and not to criticize it because it didn't obviously affect him from being on my list, but to your point, though, as far as like later career, and I try to do this in general, especially, again, there's a lot of ties to him and the next person I'm going to mention. But just lastly, capping off on this, I guess, but you're right, like, because like one of his, I don't even know if you call it a knee tap, Ed, but you usually see it in MMA from an open stance when their lead hands are touching, where he'll do the cross from the rear hand as he goes to kind of pick the knee, and he does it from so far out and never gets within a shot these last years of his career. That it's turned into a feint. It's not even a wrestling threat as much. It's almost it feels like a striking feint to open up a strike now because he's not getting in on the things like he used to in that sense, but. It's the reason, capping off why he makes the list too, when I was thinking about it, like and there are a lot of great wrestlers who, surprisingly enough, if you go look at their stats, they've been taken down much more than you think, and that's not a knock, because maybe they have underrated jiu-jitsu wrestling, but when do you think of Frankie Edgar ever really being controlled outside of Frankie Edgar Gray Maynard 1, which is a fight that doesn't get talked about enough and was really underrated, but really outside of that, when do you remember long instances of him being controlled?
He's been taken down, being controlled. No, I mean, like, I think Benson Henderson might have gotten down once, but he took Benson Henderson went down way more times. Conversely, BJ actually took him down because BJ is a great offensive wrestler, and if he did it more often, maybe he'd be here on this list. But,
yes, exactly. It was so. I know what you mean because he's getting whatever you think about the rounds in the first fight of the Edgar fight. He's now in round 8. At UFC 118. They're getting into rounds 4. He's clearly down, getting his ass kicked. Edgar has his number. And for some reason, he's like, oh, wait, I can get takedowns whenever I want, because kind of like another thing I posted on Twitter, like showing BJ Penn doing things Khabib was doing like almost 20 years ago, or doing them up a division to guys who made a living doing it, like John Fitch. Like, you're like, BJ was so fucking good at this. Why the hell did he not do this more? But again, that's a whole nother fight IQ, and that's another discussion.
Yeah. Edgar's a great shout. You're on fire. It's a good list.
All right, what's your number 4, sir? Put me out of my ranting misery. Otherwise, I'll start fanning out on Frankie Edgar.
All good. Well, I'm like kicking myself because in the beginning you were explaining how you're dividing the types of wrestling, and I didn't realize the clinch wrestling was going to be a different thing.
No, please, it shouldn't affect your list because again, I got to be on this show and I got to come up with a fresh list. So a part of my way of justifying in my head is you know what? I'm not going to use you here, but you'll get your shine. You'll get your shine on another list. So don't
Well,
let my criteria bleed over to you, Ed. You're good.
Sure. Well, yeah, I considered it part of neutral wrestling, so he's here. I'm sure he's going to show up for you as well. Kamaru Usman, the UFC welterweight champion, and just to start it off, I did also write an article about him.
I read that one. That was really good. That was really good.
That one was a little different. That was like juxtaposing him and Colby Covington using their fights with RDA. That was a fun one. But yeah, the credentials. NCAA champion, Division II.
That's right. Yeah, it was very educational. I enjoyed that. It was it was a different perspective. Again, that's why, like I said at the top of the show, why I'm having you on it. It's a different perspective even for people like myself. So it's a treat, man. So yeah, wax on about Usman. He's not on my list. So you're not stepping on any toes. The lane is wide open, sir.
Cool. Yeah, I'm pretty great. I agree. Yeah. So D2 champ. Kamaru Usman, but I think what lends more credibility to his credentials is that his freestyle career, he did make a little run to try to qualify for the Olympic trials because he's graduating right around the 2012 Olympics. On his way to trying to do that, because he did not qualify for the trials, which is a very hard thing to do. It's not like anyone can just show up and compete at the Olympic wrestling trials. You have to place at a pretty tough tournament or win pretty tough tournaments to get there, like the U.S. Open or Schultz or Farrell or something like that, or be a returning NCAA champion D1 or returning world medalist, stuff like that. So it's super hard to qualify for the Olympic trials, just so people know. So if it's been said that someone competed at the Olympic trials, that means they were really good. You can just know that. Oh, my dog is here. All right.
Hey, it's all good.
She ran away. But yeah, he beat NCAA champion J.P. O'Connor at one of these events. Maybe it was like last chance qualifier or something like that. So that's a big deal. He's knocking off NCAA champions. So like Woodley, I think, was talking trash on his credentials. I'm like, Woodley, did you beat any NCAA champions? I don't know because I didn't check. But Usman's good. So that kind of speaks to his neutral ability that in freestyle he's taking down these guys who are way more credentialed than him. And he had like a really close. This is in the FILA era where the matches are split up into periods, and like you had to win the period, and that was like points. It was like best 2 out of 3 periods, and it wasn't like the score carried over. I hate that. But yeah, he had a really close match with Jake Herbert, who's an NCAA champion himself and Olympic silver medalist or world silver medalist, I forget, but great wrestler. So Usman credentials alone is, putting himself in the conversation. While I don't believe that credentials are the reason someone should make the list, like it's worth saying that he was very good already coming in. And I think Usman's like final form as a wrestler, or like finally coming out of his shell, took some time because I think this wrestling for MMA concept is like, how do I make my wrestling work in MMA? Like I'm already very good, but how do I enforce it? I don't think he was totally there for a long time. Like I remember a particularly painful fight was against Elia Vermek. That was really bad. That was the 30% fight. This is the 30% of my power. Where he was just like having a really hard time finishing these shots in the cage, and it was very labored. It was very it was hard to watch. But basically his whole thing is that he's figured out the system of pressure striking, which he did not use against Colby Covington, which is upsetting. After I wrote the whole article about it, he has this pressure striking system. Yeah, I know.
I wanted to see how they matched up too.
I thought he'd beat him up. He can get people within range to the cage. And then basically he's got this long entry on his singles. Not like a dive bomby, like a crazy one like Khabib has, but he can cover a lot of distance with his freakish long arms to get to like head and side singles, whatever he wants. Push that to the cage. And once you're on the cage, that's where he becomes probably one of the top 5 neutral wrestlers in MMA. His clinch grappling is pretty amazing, especially against the fence. In the open space, too, which is where a couple of times we saw him match up with Colby Covington. They did clinch briefly a couple of times, and every time it looked like he was about to beat him up real bad, and then he just disengaged after he hit him a couple of times. But yeah, it's hard to say what exactly makes Usman so good technically in the clinch, because I think a lot of it is that he's really, really strong. And Coach Mike, in one of his articles or a tweet or something, said he has a freaky android Martian strength. And like that sounds true to me. Wow. I don't think that like pure skill is how we should evaluate people, because it's efficacy, right? And I think a lot of what makes him effective is he's super duper strong. One of the things he's able to do is he plays like the long game when it comes to the clinch, he's not looking for short-term outcomes. He's thinking like, I'm going to be here for a while and I'm going to, you know, make you tired and then I'm going to beat you up. So like one of the things he'd do against RDA, for example, when RDA fought Colby Covington, there was all this space between their hips when RDA's back was on the cage, and he was able to use that space to strike, to move Covington because Covington's hips were so far away. It really wasn't that hard to move his upper body because his hips weren't really involved. Whereas Usman's really comfortable pressing in his hips and then collapsing things and smothering you. And then when he wants to break off and work, he can break off and work. But he's super good at transitioning between really like short underhooks, like kind of having his hand on the waist sometimes. That's like a really effective control position for him. He can switch
I noticed that.
Basically and swim inside, double collar tie, strike, drop down to doubles whenever he wants. So just having like the freedom to transition between positions whenever he wants is a really big deal for me. In open space, he's a good wrestler as well, and he can flat wrestle this guy. I mean, if you follow him on Instagram or if you follow Michael Chandler on Instagram,
yes,
these guys post wrestling videos all the time. They're just flowing. They're not going super hard, which is funny because Chandler dunks on him all the time because they're going like 75%, and that's just enough where Chandler can show off and like go a little harder.
There's no soft with Chandler. I'll tell you that. There's no. That dude is the definition of explosive.
He hit a magic stick on Usman, which is basically when someone reaches for your leg and you pass the leg over their head and go behind them. He hit a magic stick on him in practice. He's probably mad about that. But yeah, Chandler and Usman. If you watch those two wrestle, you'd be like, oh my god, they have incredible abilities in all stages. Like they're neutral, they're scrambling, everything. So Usman can flat wrestle. I think people see him as like this stiff kind of wrestler, whereas like, oh, he's just strong and like digs people in the clinch. But no, he can turn it on if he wants to. It's just that there aren't that many people right now in MMA that can push him in that way, which is why I was really excited to see him wrestle against Covington, and he didn't. But I feel like you have gears turning about Usman right now. Like, what did you want to?
No. By the way, I feel like to strengthen your argument as far as how it would play out, I feel like Colby all but gives even more credence to that argument for the fact that he didn't push it. That kind of tells you something as far as maybe where he thinks they stack up wrestling wise, regardless of your or my opinion, right?
Yeah, I think he knew.
But also, when you talk about the flow of Chandler, like I'm a good partner. That's one of the good things. I'm not a good martial artist. I'm not a good wrestler. I'm not a good anything. But I could do a little bit of everything, and I'm a good training partner. And not enough people do that flow wrestling. I'm telling you, fighters, grapplers, do more flow work. You don't have to go hard on sparring. Save your joints. I used to watch Jay Haran and Martin Kampman. I'm going to burn these two names because they won't come up on this list. But they used to do flow, like full MMA wrestling, MMA sparring. But a lot of it was clench, takedown, scrambles back to the feet, and all the grappling positions that ensue. And so it was primarily grappling. And I love watching stuff like that. And by the way, I also wanted to mention Kampman because he's not going to get mentioned on this list. But you want to talk about non-wrestlers who learned how to wrestle for MMA? And I watched him do endless rounds with Tyson Griffin's brother, Kyle Griffin, who I'm not familiar with his credentials, but a lot of guys have brought him in for camps, I think Vitor and whatnot. But he would just drill and drill and drill with Kyle. And watching him, just for defensive wrestling, and these guys pick up. But sorry, back over to your pick of Usman though. Speaking of welterweights, hey, we're talking about welterweights at least, folks, in the UFC. Yeah. But back over to your welterweight pick, Usman. I figured he was going to come up, and I was hoping he would come up. That's a great point on collapsing the hips. As far as that goes, and the way I characterize Usman, and you brought up some of those points, and so I want to ask you correct me if believe me, feel free to correct me. But I always characterize him as kind of an overachiever as far as when people were saying, oh, he's division this or as far as division that. And back to your point, you kind of just said it yourself, right? You can't, all credentials aren't everything. So I felt like he was an overachiever in that sense from a credential standpoint, but also positionally. You referenced the Martian strength, and yeah, I feel like when I go back to watch his collegiate footage to some of his MMA footage, I feel like 9 out of 10 athletes, good wrestlers, don't finish some of these takedowns from these specific contextual positions within the context. And he uses that freakish strength. But on the other side, as far as maybe why he doesn't get credit for his technical abilities, here's my theory is because, and I write about this when I'm more talking about his mat wrestling, but it applies in the clinch and just in general.
Hmm.
he consistently makes high percentage choices. That sounds so
Yeah.
simple. It sounds
Yeah.
like a no-brainer, but no one in MMA really, like as far as percentages, makes consistently smart choices. And this guy is making consistent, not just smart, high percentage. I say that for a reason. High percentage choices with what he's choosing to do in the clinch, what he's choosing to do on the mat. And I think that's why he gets the results he does. But also, and I don't know, I'm talking out of my ass here, Ed, but that's just my theory as maybe why he doesn't get credit to what you were saying as for not being technical. Or
Yeah.
technical, I should
100%.
say, in air quotes.
100%. And that's what I was getting ready to say, actually, is that I think the thing that really blows me away with him is that, like, I don't have a super deep understanding of his game because he hasn't shown us that much because he hasn't had to. His
Sure.
plan A is working. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
and I was about to mention, like, his freestyle experience. I think the way that's translated is he knows how to pick his battles. Where, some people find him boring because he does spend a long time in positions that don't look super dynamic, even though I'm sure if you're in them, you're like, oh my God, I can't move. This is such a slog. And then he's like beating on your body and like just putting you in ridiculous positions. Also, just if you want to add in, we're talking about MMA wrestling, if you want to add in like ground and pound and dirty boxing to the mix, his dirty boxing, I mean, it's probably the best in the UFC right now, best in MMA right now, most likely. So the way he can manipulate people in the clinch to set up a lot of these positions, like he'll be able to he'll have an overhook. He'll just be leaning in super hard on that one side, and like the hips are tight, so he doesn't really you can't really escape on the other side. And he'll just start pounding hooks in the body like he did to Woodley. There's that gif where it just repeats over and over again. It looks like he's punching him forever.
Yep.
Like stuff like that. It's a big deal. So he can like bide his time and be dominant without really transitioning between positions too much. And then when he sees like, oh, your stance is narrow, or oh, this overhook is loose, or like, yeah, I have a clean way to change levels here, double off and get you out of there. He's also somebody that can, there's a couple of things he does to finish shots in the cage that I really like. Frankie Edgar did this too. Take him off the cage, take him off the cage completely. So it's not just like run him off and run him back on the cage. It's like hard corner turn to finish it center.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he'll do that with like a single. He'll run the pipe out toward the center, or he'll like drop to his knees to sit your butt down in the center and then finish from there. So he's got a really good system of finishes. I feel like he definitely knows what he's doing. He thinks about these things before he does them. Things are on purpose, which is a very big deal for me. I love fighters who do things on purpose, which sounds crazy, but it's not that common. So yeah, Kamaru Usman is definitely killing it right now. He's not super flashy, so it's not like an obvious choice maybe for some people, but just I consider that neutral wrestling, just the way he can control things from the feet and get those takedowns when he wants, and I don't think anyone's taken him down. So definitely a good shout on my end. I'm proud of that one.
Well, I like how our lists are varying out right now. I think we're covering a lot of ground. That's for dang sure.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
If you really think about just so far, and we're not even to number 3, where I'm going to suggest a Chinese fire drill, and I'm going to spin the revolver around. It's going to point right back to you, sir. It's just like we're in Deer Hunter here. What is your?
I'm going to go again.
Yeah, you're going to take the lead again now. You're going to take the lead again as up until number 1. So, what made your number 3 selection, Ed?
This might be controversial. Not controversial because he's on my list, but because he's only number 3. George St. Pierre.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. There's no way he wasn't making my list. Just positioning people are going to be mad at him.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, George St. Pierre, number 3. What can I say? In general, GSP is an awesome shout because he is like the ultimate systems fighter. I feel like that's what I really find myself gravitating to as an analyst, is someone who clearly thought about what they're going to do ahead of time and everything works together. He is the fighter where that is the most true, where everything works together. That's not to discount all of the individual facets of his game, all of which are very good, but together, that's what makes him, a top 3 greatest of all time for pretty much everybody. But yeah, George St. Pierre, things about his wrestling, particularly from neutral, that are great. The double leg, just in general. Mechanically, it's great. Athletically, it's great. Systematically, it's great. He's kind of the person that ingrained like the reactive double as a valid strategy to a lot of people, just because I think once he had his full jabbing system down, people were really eager to close distance on him, which is a great way to draw somebody into a double leg. So having a really lethal attack from neutral is awesome for MMA because you don't really have to have a huge variety of offense as a wrestler. You just need a couple looks that are going to get you to that thing. So having just a great double leg is a great thing to have as an MMA wrestler, because in wrestling, no one's coming at you like that. Almost never. Almost never. Except in freestyle when there's only a few seconds left and they jump over your head and try to like flying squirrel you, which happens more often than you'd think. It's almost never happening where someone's like coming straight at you without any sort of tie up and their hands are high, their hips are there for you. Like that's a gift.
Right.
And he took it. He took it, man. And he took it against, four-time All-American and NCAA champion Josh Koscheck.
Yes.
He took it against the guy who I thought was an open space good wrestler, Thiago Alves, also incredibly strong hips. The guys he was beating in his prime, I do rate a lot of their takedown defense, like John Fitch, good wrestler, just flat good wrestler. I don't think highly of his credentials or like think of him as like a super lethal takedown artist or anything, but like guys like that, I really respect.
Sure.
The Johnny Hendricks fight is definitely tough, but
right.
My personal view of GSP's career is he had that knee injury. Is either before or after the Diaz fight. I think Condit might have been the first one after the knee injury. Yeah,
Condit was the first one back because that was such a tough fight.
Yeah, he had a lot of trouble with that injury. I mean, like it was everyone's eating up all the news because he's gone for an extended period of time. So everyone's like, "Well, how's GSP? Is he recovering?" I was following it as close as anyone else, and like it didn't take. Like he injured the other knee or re-injured that knee, and like there was a lot of issues. And like for someone who's so explosive, and a lot of their efficacy comes from being an athlete, that's a tough thing to go through. So I think his shot got a little weaker after he came back. Not that like Condit's hard to take down, so you didn't really notice then, because Condit's really easy to take down.
Right.
Not to say he's a bad fighter; it's just not a thing he's good at.
No, totally,
Tries to
absolutely,
be good at
sure.
Either. But yeah, against Hendricks, you really saw it where, and it's not to say Hendricks is easy to take down. Obviously, he isn't. He's a two-time NCAA champion, three-time finalist. But against Hendricks, you just kind of saw the limitations, especially because the stance matchup, it kind of took away GSP's jab, and a lot of things happened in that fight where that kind of didn't expose the issues with this game, because he's post-prime at this point, most people would agree.
Totally.
But it just kind of illustrated the limitations of where his wrestling can go. I think in a vacuum, he's not all that as a wrestler. There's a video of him like having a friendly wrestling match with like a football player or something like that on YouTube that I've seen. I'm just like, it's not like that much to take away from it because it's like a big guy. It's much bigger than him. But I'm just like watching what he does and just like looking at how he tries to wrestle. Nothing impressive happening there. Like when he actually has to like get his hands on someone and set up a shot. Like he's getting to a single and stuff like that. Like there's decent things going on, but I wasn't blown away. It really illustrates how impressive it is that he worked the system together to make him look like a lights out wrestler, like amazing. And people are like, "Oh, he could go to the Olympics," which is definitely not true. So like, big shout to GSP for having this really effective system. Awesome attacks, good against the cage, good singles. I mean, like great defense. His hips are ridiculous. Like just a great wrestler. Definitely a huge shout for me. The reason he doesn't go higher is just because I don't think it has the depth people want it to. So definitely effective, but I think there are limitations as well.
Totally. He's on my list, as you'd guess. You sunk my battleship. He's actually my number one. No, not because I want to be an ultimate hipster asshole and a wrestlers list with two guys that wear gis to the ring, which my list starts and ends with. So I'm probably going to get stoned for that. But no, and I don't take any issue. I think you illustrated it nicely there and also before as far as the analyst perspective, parsing out these picks. And I definitely did do that myself, and I don't disagree with that process. I sign off on that. However, like I remind everybody watching or anybody, criticizing these lists, anyone's top 5 lists, right? This isn't anything new here we're doing, is that they're subjective. Just like pound for pound. This is essentially, it's like we're always doing a pound for pound list. And my list is my list, Ed's list is Ed's list. And particular to my list being my list, when I'm having trouble, I'm thinking about it, I'm like, okay, am I picking this one because this makes more sense, so to speak, right? Or am I picking this because it's my pick? So I always try to stay true to that as best I can, and maybe that's why George St Pierre is so high on this list for me. He's number one. But yes, as far as if I want to back it up with some some empirical evidence here, yeah, I'm gonna definitely point to the functionality of his game, and the fanciness of it too. I mean, like You could, technically be like the first time he beats a wrestler and it's super impressive was Frank Trigg, which is technically the truth because Frank Trigg, whether you like him or not, he's one of the higher credentialed wrestlers active in the welterweight division at this time. We're going back to the mid-aughts, okay, right, folks? He had that rivalry with Hughes, etc. This is that same guy. And St Pierre just wiped the floor with him, doing the backflips after he backmounts and out wrestles him. Like that was actually the first Josh Koscheck versus George St Pierre one was actually GSP versus Frank Trigg. But yes, also go back and watch the one I referenced, George St Pierre versus Josh Koscheck once, because we're checking the not just wrestling here where it's really coming into the forefront, but this example gets the check box of defense. My two favorite gifts as far as takedown defense was. I forget the name of the wrestler now. I know he had to do with the Cage Fighter brand. He would coach a lot of guys. He's a real credentialed wrestler. But he's in one of BJ's camps, and he's got like a single leg lift, and he starts running him toward the cage. And BJ Penn's in midair, and he starts kind of one leg dancing off the cage. And George St. Pierre has a similar one, except it's a different takedown. I believe it's some type of power double or some type of variation of that. Koscheck's going for it. But I'm not really paying attention to Koscheck. It's St. Pierre. His hips are just popping up and also pushing down, driving his opponent down, which almost seems like it's elevating him up like he's goddamn Michael Jordan of wrestling defense. And he's literally really like experiencing the air up there. It's one of my favorite sprawls. Of course, George St. Pierre. I'll reference, I think, 3 or 4 matchups here as far as George St. Pierre wrestling. There's that fight, right? Then there's one of my favorite ones, which is we're getting into the, you mentioned John Fitch. It's around that era. We don't see too much with the BJ Penn fight that comes after the Fitch fight because he's more working on closing BJ's striking down and tiring him out first. So it was more conservative style takedowns from the clinch. But that Thiago Alves fight, for the reasons you said, Ed, as far as Thiago Alves being underrated. But when we saw him, whether it was a grinder like Fitch or a guy with powerful leg kicks like Thiago Alves, we really got to see George St. Pierre use his mobility to avoid said fighter's strength. But he had to use that mobility to set up takedowns as well. And whether he's dancing around doing the leg kick to the, down, you want to talk about athletic, takedowns. For
lead
the
leg
Russian
kicking
cats
entries.
were doing. Yeah. I mean, George St. Pierre was doing them off the lead leg as well. And then one of my favorite ones, I believe he was training with the Canadian wrestling team at the time. Take for that what you will. But this, along with that fight with Condit, it's probably the most hulked up and big you see George St. Pierre. I don't think this fight was on that short a notice, but like George St. Pierre was like almost like a chameleon at this point, But he's unveiling a jab here, he's unveiling wrestling here, and it was almost like he was specifically designing the plan for these fighters. And he comes in to his rematch against Matt Hughes, or the trilogy. He beat him, but he beat him by strikes, folks. Matt Hughes still had, was the superior wrestler on paper, had the submission victory, the grappling dominance over him on paper, right? Mm-hmm. And man, the takedowns we see in that fight, particularly from the clinch, there's one in particular where he just tosses him in the air like a kid. I mean, it is one of my favorite takedowns ever. Those are my 3 favorite wrestling George St. Pierre performance fights right there. But great shout.
Yeah, I love when he threw Hughes.
Yes.
Some people will probably put Hughes on their list. It's interesting, just in terms of how I view. People might be wondering, they might not be, how I view considering things for the era, stuff like that. I tend to go just recent. Let's go with right now in context. So someone like Kevin Randleman, who is in a vacuum an awesome wrestler, and still pulled off tons of crazy stuff in MMA, reactive doubles, the insane mat return that he hit on Fedor, stuff like that. That's all great. And even at the time, he wasn't the best at setting up his wrestling and wasn't the best at understanding how you get those positions. And mostly just had to do with him not really having much of a striking game. He had a couple weapons, but not much of a game. And then his ground game wasn't really there either. It's just, rest in peace, obviously, Kevin Randleman. But that's somebody if we were saying just for the era, how good were they? I'd go, number 2 or number 1 for that. But just I'm considering if I'm judging them if they were here today, which isn't fair because they weren't fighting people from today.
Totally.
I don't care about that.
But no, you know what? It's fair because I'm a big fan of giving classic its due, and I'm usually that guy that's trying to be genuine, contrarian, all the above. At the same time, Yeah, you're right. For a lot of the reasons you said, like a lot of the classic guys aren't getting shine on this list. Like Matt Hughes isn't on my list. I mean, in the truncated version I do for MMA Junkie, I may throw him in the honorable mention,
Nice.
because of what he means in context. And one other thing I will say, Matt Hughes in context, like the same reason I didn't put Sean Shirk. Well, that fish got eaten by Matt Hughes, and the Matt Hughes fish got eaten by the George St Pierre fish. And not that I like to go by MMA math, but it does help parse the list out pretty effectively in this, because especially
It's
when we saw
useful.
all those head-to-heads, we saw that triangle play out. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
So we know how all those iterations of the matchups go. But I will give credit Hughes for this. He was one of the first guys. Now, you want to judge his cleanness, his technique. That's on you, Ed, especially. And again, you got to do context with the era. However, he was one of the first guys preaching chain wrestling early.
Yeah,
It wasn't about
yeah.
the first. He was already saying, even in the mid-aughts, he was saying, guys in MMA are getting good at really defending that first attack. We got to focus on attacks 2, 3, and 4. And I'm a big chain wrestling guy, so that ranks highly with me. So I do want to give Matt Hughes credit as far as that regard. But yeah, he's not on
For
my
sure.
list.
You're gonna like my honorable mention then.
Okay, cool. All right, well,
Not there yet, though.
my number 3, man, I'll probably be as emphatic as this, which I just did for my altered number 3. So, my number 3 is yeah, we'll just keep going this way actually. So my number 3 is another one where I don't even know if he makes most people's list, but again, keep in mind I'm going to keep Clench and Matt and stuff for a separate
Sure.
list. And this is a guy that I talk a lot about, so perhaps there's some bias there. But specifically when we talk about boxing to wrestling, right? You said that was your focus for Frankie Edgar. Now, the person who taught that to me was a guy I've referenced on here before, old coach of mine, Joey Varner. He's fought a couple times too, but coach Extreme Couture, a matchmaker, etc. But I remember about 2008. So this fighter is fighting, but he's not on his run. He's not known for what he's doing. So we're not talking about him. But Joey's explaining to me, Ed, about the connection to boxing and wrestling, and particularly about the footwork. We talked about the level changing aspect of it, but the footwork and the angles and the bouncing, the staying light on your toes and looking for those
Yeah.
angles. And essentially the conversation and the lesson he imparted to me was that there are plenty of iterations and everybody has to find their own style. How that is true, but you do need to understand the connection between the two, because if you the better you understand how one links to the other. And by the way, Brian Caraway actually is the only other person that I've had this conversation with in depth, and it was unrelated, but he had similar points as far as one makes the other the other better. So, if you understand wrestling angles and you're a wrestler, you start applying that. You're gonna start once you start finding those common threads. Chances are your striking is probably going to improve a little better than just trying to. I'm a boxer now. I'm no longer a wrestler. Like, no, you can still be a wrestler. You just need to learn how to incorporate those things, and vice versa. And Dominick Cruz, I would argue, did that. Like Frankie Edgar, who we were
Nice.
talking about, he broke a lot of footwork rules, right? Especially from a striking standpoint. But if you think about it in a wrestling standpoint and where those two lanes intersect, as far as gaining those angles, again, feints aren't just for striking. Feints are for, I'm not sure if we call them that in wrestling, Ed, but fakes are a big part of some guys more than others. Granted, some styles, but they're prevalent in there as far as the footwork,
sure.
the engaging, the feeling out process. And Dominick Cruz, you want to talk about neutral space? I mean, to argue that he could be on this list, I will say that like the neutral space, the way we laid context, especially how Ed explained it, was like you could argue Dominick Cruz lives in this neutral space. He's never in one position for a long time. One thing that scores well with me again is defense. Even though there's one guy on here I left out, who I wanted to give a defensive shout. But like you can have a stopwatch and go through and watch all Dominick Cruz's fights, because I just recently have yet again. And tell me when you get to 6 or 7 seconds when his back hits the fence, because it's not going to get there.
Right.
It might touch 6 seconds maybe once, but because, yes, folks, the guy that's in your ear, newer fans, that's screaming underhooks from the commentary position, he knows why. There's a reason why he's saying it, and he practices what he preaches. You cannot keep him under there. He is doing techniques that we would see, these hybrid guys who we're giving credit now, like the Robert Whitaker and Max Holloways of the world. Like, he's doing these things to thwart people of trying to contain him already, as far as you got the underhook, but you only got it on one side, which he was always diligent about to at least have the one, and then he's using the collar tie variation. faking one way and swinging out toward the other. Like, he was doing that before these Robert Whitakers and Max Holloways were earning titles doing it. Like, and just setting up his takedown. One of my favorite takedowns, the knee tap. He would, do variations when he needed to. I think he even goes like Barza guard a couple times in the WEC. And even though I don't really consider, like I threw out a Peterson reference earlier. Like, Kelvin Gastelum's another guy who uses Peterson rolls really well. I'm a Peterson roll nut, Ed. Okay, it's one of my favorite things. Again, because my wrestling is more toward Matt. And one of the things I noticed is if you're in turtle position and you can't grab the single, I'm hardwired, so I'm always going to swim for the single. But there was a portion when I just learned what the Peterson roll was, and when I learned what that was, I would always bait guys. I would keep an elbow tight on the near side so they didn't insert any hooks and start taking my back. But then I would leave this hand kind of lazily out like I was reaching and leaving this area open, because most guys will go to that in MMA. They'll go right to that side ride, right, and look to punch.
Right.
And you can take that and Peterson roll it. And Dominick Cruz would hit that all the time as well. On the seldom occasions a guy could get on top of him in a scramble. You look at his fights, his earlier ones with Uriah Faber. I believe his second fight with Faber, he hits a beautiful Peterson roll in that almost exact scenario. And then lands in a clean side control. Because if you follow the Peterson roll and you follow through, you can either come up, depending where your leg is, you kind of come up, as I explain it, into like a double leg position where you can just throw your shoulder into their stomach and kind of work from there. Cruz, he lands in just like a perfect side control position. He'll also do kind of Navy ride variations like I talk about with Khabib, except he doesn't sell out for the Dagestani handcuffs or kind of parlay the motion like Khabib will. He'll parlay it into a leg wrap or some kind of trapping. What Cruz will do more so is he'll go into like almost like, and he doesn't do it that often, and he doesn't hold it, but if you let him, he will turn almost the Navy ride into a leg drag variation. I don't know about you, Ed, but leg drag ground and pound like gets me stiff. I'm sorry. It's my favorite. Like, leg drag, for people that don't know what the leg drag position in jiu-jitsu is I'm using jiu-jitsu terminology here for the wrestling topic. It's essentially looks like it's a porno position, except the person is probably going to get effed a lot harder and in a different way. Is my best way to explain the leg drag. But like, Dominick Cruz would parlay all these positions so well, and I know we're not going to count Matt wrestling as far as why he earns a spot on this list, but living in that negative neutral space, being able to control it, being able to disrupt action when guys are trying to pressure him and just remind him of these layers of technical detail. Like, you'll see guys try to swim up into him and turtle. You'll see him reach and pick an ankle and lift it because he knows that's going to give him the leverage to circle out to safety. Like, there's so much little things that he does for someone like me who appreciates the little things. Dominick Cruz gets a number 3, but adjusted number 2 on this list.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm a big Cruz stan as well in terms of wrestling. I've written three articles about Cruz and his wrestling game. So I did a 2-parter just about overall his wrestling. I did one for his WC career and then one for his UFC career. Those were for MMA Sucker, actually. That's how long ago that was. Really, really fun one. So yeah, and in it, I basically, the thesis was like all leading towards answering the question of like what happened in the Cody Garbrandt fight. Because I'm like someone who's really annoyed when there's like a popular narrative that I think isn't true. So one of them is that like Cody Garbrandt like completely like was a completely different guy in that fight than he is in other fights. You know what I mean? It was like I wanted to point how the unique style matchup of Cruz Garbrandt is why that fight looked that way, not because Garbrandt was like just in another galaxy that day like than he is normally, but it's just because Garbrandt's a stud wrestler too, and because Cruz is there were mechanical and fundamental issues with his leads as a striker. He couldn't freeze Garbrandt up. He couldn't plan him. He couldn't get him defending the way he wanted to. So like early on in Cruz's career, the way he could get his double leg entries is he was just confusing people. His timing in his entries, like where they would come from, the strike selection, stuff like that. And a lot of the time, guys were either shelling up or they're swinging back hard for the head, and that's a great entry opportunity. Whereas Garbrandt, he's swinging for the head, but his eyes are open.
Yep.
You know what I mean? He sees you coming. He's not going to like plant and wait for you and swing on you. He sees you coming. So like that was not working for him. And then when they did end up in a wrestling situation, Garbrandt can scramble his ass off. So that wasn't really working out. And then when Cruz is getting crazy with his entries, Garbrandt doubles him off his butt. So it's like one of those things where when he can't establish the wrestling, his striking doesn't work. When he can't establish his striking, his wrestling doesn't work from a neutral standpoint. That's not why he's not on the list or anything like that. I just kind of forgot about him, honestly.
Totally.
Despite having written about him 3 times, I still forgot about him. But yeah.
Dude, it
he's
happens
awesome
in this game. There's way too much. Dunbar's number. There's too much events. There's too much fighters. It's too much to remember, man.
I really locked on to like 5 or 6, like 6 or 7 guys like right away, and I was like, okay, how am I going to figure out this list? And I didn't even try to bring other guys in because I'm like already trying to pare down the ones I have. Yeah, Cruz is an awesome shout, and I won't even talk that much more about it just because I wrote about it so many times. But his and just in terms of how boxing and wrestling work together, the double he hit on Mizugaki was awesome because it was like a long time coming too. It was like years of Cruz footage set up that double just because he's always darting off to that side on the lead straight, and time after time people swing on him to cut him off when he's trying to exit to that angle. So he hits this dart, and Mizugaki's been following him around trying to swing on him for like the 30 seconds that the fight is happening. He hits that dart, comes off to the side. Mizugaki, lifts his hands up to throw the counter, and he's gone. That's the level change. And so the finish on it was really beautiful, like really high leg finish. On that, I know you like your flashy double leg finishes. You like the Barzagar finish, and you like the sprawl from I think the GSP Koscheck one you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that was Koscheck trying to Barzagar, and then the GSP flew through the air to defend it. But yeah, like this, there's so many things I can point to where Cruz just did an awesome wrestling thing, and like he's just a fantastic wrestler, which is crazy because he was not a good wrestler before MMA. He wasn't anything.
He doesn't have high credentials at all. Like you gotta, he started young and that's about it. Like, no, totally. And I like that Mizugaki fight because it's one of those examples, like I mentioned, like kind of like the Navy Ride variation or other variations where you can shelf legs, which I love. But like Cruz, even if those shelves weren't there that he liked, he would make them happen. I believe one of the Mizugaki one where it's simple shit. Just pick a limb up and make someone post weight somewhere. Like that's my favorite type of wrestling. That's the smartest type of wrestling. You don't do anything fancy. You're picking part of their limb up because he's like for Mizugaki, he's trying to climb to get his back to the fence. He's like, no, I'd rather have your back on the mat. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lift this leg up here. And that's gonna make you a real pain to get your leverage back in balance. And Cruz did a bunch of that, man. So yeah, he's definitely got to make this list for me. So awesome. That was my number 3. Number 2, sir. Who made your number 2? We're getting into the money time now.
It's weird that you say money because it's Chad Mendes.
Oh,
that's so weird.
Oh wow, nice. I appreciate this one. Again, he's one of the few guys I delved deep into the as deep as the footage would allow me into his college career. So yeah, go ahead, please.
I weird enough, as like a guy who wrote like the article, the Wrestling for MMA, Chad Mendes article on him for Bloody Elbow, like I didn't actually look at that much college footage because I find myself spending too much time on articles sometimes. Like I'm a person who has written like 7,000 word articles before, which is not to brag about long articles because it's not all it's cracked up to be sometimes. Shout out to Fight Site author Ryan Wagner, who wrote a 20,000 word article on Jose Aldo, I believe. It was like 10 or 20. It was a lot. It was worth it, but it's really long. I've been trending away from that. I've been trying to chop it down. Actually, shout out to Coach Mike for warning me, saying this is not going to last. You're going to burn out if you keep doing this. And I didn't feel it at the time. And then maybe like a couple weeks later, I'm like, you know what? I don't feel like doing this anymore. And I stopped trying to be that guy. Anyway, I tried to focus less.
It's very true.
Tried to focus less on the college careers because for some of these guys, I could find a lot of footage. And I'm like, ooh, I have a lot to work with here. Like Gregor Gillespie, for example, I had a lot to go with, so I used it. And then I was putting in matches and talking about matches of guys that he wasn't even involved in. I was like, oh, he beat this guy, and here's this guy versus someone else, and let's talk about that. I'm like, why am I doing this?
Right.
Tangent. But so Chad Mendes, I am, I would say of wrestlers, people who wrestle in MMA and people who are wrestlers, Chad Mendes is my favorite fighter. Has been for a very long time for many, many reasons. If you want to talk about stupid, crazy athletes, there's top 5 in MMA history. Insane. I would say
insane.
I can't even explain the core strength, the explosivity, the cardio, the everything. Everything is perfect. He's an amazing, well-rounded athlete, and a absolute sweetheart of a guy too, which makes you want to love him even more. But yeah, Chad Mendes is cool because his wrestling evolved so much in MMA from his early WC to the end of his UFC career, but the tools he was using didn't. Like, he used the same tools the whole time, but just he understood how to use them more and more and more as things went on.
Totally.
We talk about like guys running at you. That's kind of what it was like in his WC careers. Guys were running at him. So he's like, okay, double leg.
Yep.
Which is funny because in his college career, he wasn't totally that guy. Like, you would go back and watch his college career and be like, oh, like he's going to be shooting from the outside a lot, but it's not the same dynamic. So he wasn't that guy. He's Mr. Front Headlock. That's his game. Like, he is awesome from front headlock.
It's like a little
snap
pitbull,
downs.
man. Oh, man.
Yeah, he's so strong, and he gets to his shots from there. It's not just the offense on front headlock; it's the way he transitions from the snap game to the legs. Very similar to Yoel Romero. They have very similar wrestling games, actually. Yoel is just more freestyle adapted. But yeah, Chad Mendes is so interesting because he wasn't this guy, and as soon as he gets to MMA, he sees what's there. He's like, okay, these guys are going to run at me hips first. I'm going to double leg all of them because he has a good double, obviously.
Right.
An interesting note is just that, I mean, obviously these entries led to other wrestling situations. So like you got to see a lot of his depth pretty early on, like his like mat returns from rear standing or his body locks, or, you know, the way he could switch off to a single, then double off the single, and the way he could do it on the cage, and his upper body game. I think his upper body game is something that's really underrated because he didn't get to use it as much in the UFC career. But he's a big throw guy. He likes to body lock. He likes to go big. As you'd expect from an athlete of his caliber. I think that's there's a correlation there between really athletic guys and guys that like to go upper body, because it does require a little bit more athleticism than finishing a leg attack, I'd say, or just more body awareness and understanding.
Yeah.
So like right off the bat, super athletic, super well-rounded as a wrestler, you know, very specialized with his strengths. But then, you know, as he goes through his career, you see him being somebody who, one, understands the way positioning works in terms of like, oh, when I throw this punch, it looks like this wrestling, you know, look. When I level change on my overhand, it could also be my level change on my double leg. And I can throw to the body, and that looks like a level change on a double leg. And I can mix in the threat of the overhand, you know, the body shot and the shot entry, and I can use them all together to set each other up. And he's someone that kind of mastered that, which is like, if you're a wrestler, if you're someone who takes leg attacks, that should be the first thing you're doing.
Yes.
Because that is so useful, because that can get you to land the overhand, it can get you to land the body shot, and it can get you to hit the leg attack. Or you go hybrid and you can go punching into the leg attack, which is even cooler because you get to do both. So he's someone that was really good at that. Someone who, like Frankie Edgar, had really awesome finishing mechanics, really good footwork on his shots. So even if you like didn't blow you off your feet right away, he would keep running it and he would find a way to finish it, or he'd find a way to transition to like get you to rear standing and mat return you or whatever. Something that me and Ryan Wagner and a few other people have been talking about forever is that Chad Mendes, on his double leg entries, he's entering with his head on the right side. When you get taught a double leg, like in a wrestling context, you're supposed to finish with your head. You're supposed to use your head on the hip. So if I'm entering and my head's on your left side, I'm gonna be, you know, collapsing the legs this way, using my head this way, doing everything the same side to blow you over, because you're here and I want you to be this way, so the leverage makes sense. Chad Mendes a bunch of times, because he had that great spear double where he could just go right through people.
Yeah.
But he also would like finish it kind of like Cruz does, where he'd kind of drag off to the side.
Yes.
And more of like a knee tap style finish, where he's kind of high on the hip and collapsing the leg on one side. His head's going this way. So he's on the hip and he's finishing the shot this way. His head's over here and his head's going that way. So his head's not really in the picture. I'm like, what's going on here? And Ryan's always asking me, like, why does he do this? I'm like, I don't know. And finally, like, a couple people piped in. Zach Makovsky piped up, first of all.
Oh, nice.
Zach Makovsky said
nice.
that Zach Makovsky is probably the fighter I've seen engage the most with analysts on Twitter. So we thank you so much for doing that, because we have so many questions and you have answers. Zach Makovsky said that in an MMA context, because you're not usually fully hitting that penetration step and like level changing and hitting your knees and working from that position, is actually pretty tough to like plant yourself and use that and finish in that way, because you are transitioning from striking to grappling. So it's not easy to go from fully upright to fully level changed, like Rustam Karimov can.
Right.
Not everyone can do that. It's hard. And it uses a lot of energy, and plus, if you screw up and your distancing was wrong and you did something wrong and you fully squat down in front of somebody or you like commit hard with your face, you're gonna get messed up probably, or they're gonna guillotine you, something like that. So that's first of all, it's just dangerous to fully level change. I get it, but there are plenty of people who pull it off. You have to be careful about how you're gonna do that deep level change. So that's first of all, because Chad Mendes is someone that finishes his shots on the feet. He doesn't drop to his knees.
Yeah.
He's running it through on the feet, so the finish is really important. He basically just said it's tough to do it that way, and it's actually easier just to focus on running them in whatever direction you want to run them in, and using your arms and the footwork to collapse their base and finish it, rather than using your head and trying to do all these things. And especially if you're like in a stance you're not used to wrestling out of, because he was right leg lead, right, in college. Hard to remember right now.
No, yeah, I don't remember. No, offhand, no.
He switched in MMA, yeah, but go ahead, yeah.
No, I was gonna say though, like that's a great point about the head, because like I'm someone that says like you don't use your head enough. People don't use their head enough in grappling, and usually I'm referring to like whether it's Randy Couture clench under the chin or using your head as a post, which is super underrated.
I love using my head as a post.
Jiu-jitsu guys, like you're jiu-jitsu guys, you love using your arms to choke. Why aren't you using your head to post? Like it blows me the fuck away. Another rant, just like another rant. Why we don't see more cradles in MMA? It's the most like stupidest thing. Like
great guard pass.
I had a yeah, like I not to name drop, and this isn't the name to name drop, obviously, but like I even had a conversation with Colby Covington about this. Like I'm like, dude, why the hell? Like anytime I can get an ear of a wrestler in MMA of a high level, I'm like, why aren't we seeing cradles in them? It's the stupidest freaking thing. I'm sorry, it's a tangent. Like everyone, Darren Elkins' big knockout over, it was set up by a fucking cradle. Okay, a cradle is the reason for that knockout. If you trace it back, sorry, cradles don't get enough shine. Cradles are the Scottie Pippen of the grappling world. No, sorry, getting sidetracked here. But no, that's a great. God, now, wow, I'm getting really ridiculously sidetracked here.
It's cool. I like it.
No. Save me. Who the fuck were we just talking about? This is why you don't.
Chad Mendes, head on the opposite side, not using his head.
Yeah, it makes sense though, because like people don't use their head enough, right? And that's what led me off on the tangent. Sorry. But at the same time, like that makes perfect sense as to why the head isn't being used. And don't you love that? Like, shouts to Zach Makowski as well. I'm a big fan of his. Like when the answer is something so common sense and that makes so much sense, you're like, yeah, that actually is pretty. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
like that makes a ton of sense. Like, yeah, you got to find different ways. Like back to our guy Dominick Cruz and his variations. Like, he's not using his head much, and like, I don't know. It's hard for me to weigh in because, again, I only wrestled with the wrestling team, but I was not officially a part of the wrestling team in high school. Sure. And my wrestling was the worst part of my mixed martial arts adventure and journey. And I didn't steer, as you could tell by these ears, I didn't do much steering at all. Unless I'm deep in on a single, there wasn't much, as far as MMA context, as far as head steering goes. So, yeah, that makes actually perfect sense on why Mendes didn't do it. Mendes, I love watching him in high school. I love that you mentioned the front headlock to the double, and also how you mentioned as far as how his overhand played into that, because it's like this thing. Again, I'm not trying to keep plugging my Twitter here, but I tweeted this the other day. Like whether you're working from a guard as a jiu-jitsu guy or you're attacking as a wrestler, you need to understand the concept that going from high to low, low to high, and repeating the process is going to produce results.
Yes.
And what you do to capitalize on that's up to you, but it will produce results. And I was saying in regards to a Chael Sonnen versus Tim McKenzie fight where he goes double leg, gets him to overreact in the sprawl, which opens up the front headlock, and he goes from the front headlock back down low to the inside trip, and then all of a sudden that lock now turns into a Darce, and he went high, low, right? Or, I talk about Frank Shamrock being one of the first guys in the late 90s. He's attacking with the guard, but then it opens up to the leg lock, high, low in jiu-jitsu as well. It's just a principle that is there, and Chad Mendes, like, he had that down as far as his front headlock. You even see jiu-jitsu guys explain that, like even Marcelo Garcia, he had this thing where he explains the arm drag into a double leg, and I remember attaching that with the high-low theory and to like kind of what Mendes was using something up high to muscle somebody up high when what you're really wanting to attack is actually down low. Like, just by even doing just a shitty arm drag where I didn't even get the arm drag to the person's back, for whatever reason, my double legs went up. As soon as I started incorporating that little crappy arm drag first, all of a sudden my entries were that much better, Ed. I don't know what it was. And Chad Mendes, especially if you watch his collegiate career, you see him working all these like variations of it. And there's a match, I don't know what it is, but like watching him against tall, lanky, funky wrestlers was like my favorite styles match as far as wrestlers go, because you have this athletic ball of muscle versus like long, lanky funk guys. Like it was always a
Jay
fun
Jaggers.
watch. There we go. And I guess the only reason, finishing up on Chad Mendes, why I went deep into his career, I think the theme of the article was, I think he was gonna grappling, like was it Glover? I forget.
Jeff Glover, yeah.
Yeah.
He won.
Yeah. Yeah. And but it was essentially like just comparing his collegiate to his MMA career as far as like the always the bridesmaid. I forget. I compared him to a sports team that would always make the championships and not win. So I guess that was my article why I ended up going way deep back there. But yeah.
Yeah. One more point on Chad Mendes. That's like half. That's half of why he's my number 2. His defense,
go. Yeah.
His defense is
insane.
Freaking ridiculous. Not that many people tried to take him down, but some of the ones that did are pretty effective MMA wrestlers. Clay Guida and Nick Lentz. He made them look so stupid for trying. He made it look like it's impossible to take him down. And one of the craziest things I saw was like they tried to take him down against like in the space near the cage. They're like, I'm going to get this shot. And even though he's got ridiculous hips and he's so much stronger than me, I can get him to the cage and I can wear on him. No, his sprawl, his hips and his positioning is so strong that he was like sinking his hips somehow so far he was able to still fit his legs in front of the cage and hit like a full sprawl and circle out before they could get him there. The distance was right. Everything was right. And he's just like, no, it's impossible to take me down. I think Uriah Faber said like maybe once ever he's taken Mendes down in practice. Like it's just not a thing that's possible to do. Wow. He's crazy. Yeah, as far as college career, he AA'd a couple times and he made the finals his senior year. And there was a really controversial no takedown call in the second period where it was like the same as the Logan Stieber Jordan Oliver call, where he has him on his butt with both legs collected, and he's got like a chest wrap position basically to stall it out, and they don't call the takedown. But like I have both your legs, you're on your butt.
Yes. Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yep.
This is a takedown, and they don't call it, and it really changed the dynamic of the match. And Jaggers breaks his ankle in the last like 30 seconds or something like that and hangs on and survives. So everyone's like, oh, he lost to Jaggers on a broken ankle. I'm like, Jaggers only broke his ankle at the end, first of all. But yeah, and Jaggers is great too, so it's not like it was a bad guy to lose to. But yeah, poor Chad, didn't get an NCAA title and didn't get a UFC title. But as far as like skills, athleticism, and everything, he's like an all-time best for me, if that makes sense, because his resume, unfortunately, doesn't really stand out because he doesn't have a lot of the name wins. Even though his competition was solid, it just wasn't like outstanding. And what he's known for is doing really well against guys and losing to really, really great guys. But even in his last fight against Volkanovski, I think of Volkanovski pretty highly as an MMA wrestler. He took him down a bunch of times because he had this cool interplay where Volkanovski was pressuring really well and like level changing on his jab and using that lead leg roundhouse to the body, which was a really cool look. But Mendes was like really content to counter for some reason. But his counters were awesome. Like he was getting around Volk's guard really well, and he was also going body counter really well. And Volkanovski wasn't really ready for a lot of the entries of Mendes. So the way he like turns the corner and finishes his shots, that's one where he was a lot more traditional in his finishes, where he was going head finish, and like it was leading him to more. I don't know how to describe it. More like transitional grappling positions.
Yes,
where like
exactly. Yeah,
he's getting it, and then Volk's out in his hips, and he's pushing away, and yet now you have to like scramble with Volk, which isn't really a great look.
Yeah, which ended up biting him in the butt, made him work harder than he probably wanted to, ideally.
Yeah, but the thing that I can't factor into this that I really want to is Mendes' mat wrestling is actually very, very good, and people always trash Mendes because like, oh, he's this great takedown artist, but he doesn't have good jiu-jitsu, and that's why he didn't like win titles. The reason he didn't win titles is because he was fighting the best defensive wrestler in MMA history. 1, 2, his mat wrestling is great. It's just very his jiu-jitsu isn't totally incorporated. Right. But if you look at the finish versus Ricardo Lamas, that is some of the best like folk style riding. With ground and pound I've ever seen in my life.
That was really good.
Freaky, because he's holding him down with one hand. He's got one hand on the back of his head. Yeah. He's in the referee's position. And he's just like seamlessly transitioning between like punching under his arms, chopping the arm, breaking him down, keep on the hip, switching over to the other hip, punching him, and he's finishing him while he's putting on this very clinical folk style ride. And I'm like, whoa, So if you consider that a transitional position, I'll throw it in. But yeah, Mendes had it all as a wrestler and as a fighter. I think super highly of him. Our Discord chat for the fight site, which is one of like our Patreon benefits. The main chat server is 179 Chad does everyone. It's a UFC 179 Chad. It's the one that fought Aldo too. But yeah, it's like we in the name of the patron. So if you sign up for the Discord, you're a Chad. You're a Patreon Chad.
Jesus
and you have it
Christ.
in your name is green. So I like worship Chad Mendes. There's no way he wasn't making top 2 on this list.
That's funny. I'm glad you mentioned the Lens fight. That was because that was his 30% Usman fight. Like, he had the flu on that fight.
That was the flu game, yeah.
And then yeah, totally. Like I mean, his MMA career, he's having a fight. Black belts like from Cub Swanson to like Javi Vasquez. Like, yeah, you're not gonna venture off into the jiu-jitsu
doing
world too much.
backflips on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Ed, we got about 10 or 11 minutes left to cut through the rest. So we'll speed up. We'll speed up this, but no, that was a great great shout on Chad Mendes there. So my number 2, which will serve as my number 1, and then we'll get to your number 1 after, sir. I don't know. I'm curious if we'll have the same person. It's like, I have this person on the list, and I'm going to get crucified because it's like, how can you have this person on the list and not have this other person, which is true.
Sure,
because, but then I would have to have that other person ranked above this person because that person beat this person. And that is, code talk aside, Daniel Cormier is my number 2 to my adjusted number 1. I know you might throw some stones at me here, but again, this is my not top 5 list. Okay, not only that, but no, honestly, as far as defensive, we're highlighting defense. You're not really gonna find that with Daniel Cormier. I'm not gonna be boasting about his defense at all here. He could show up in the clinch, but the guy who beat him will probably show up there, folks. If you're wondering why he's not there, and I'll be quiet on him because it's not that he's not worthy. He absolutely is. But Daniel Cormier, not just because I like him more, but because from favorites of mine, Josh Barnett, tossing him in the air, that Strikeforce Grand Prix, the high, those high crotch hikes, lifting people in the air like that. That's all great and grand. And then watching, just what he was able to do to Greco-Roman standout Dan Henderson. Again, you want to talk about upper body. Upper body's not used enough or emphasized enough, but some guys, even my favorites, even some of the best best wrestlers, were almost too much upper body, right? This is, even though I love Dan Henderson, that's why he's not on this list. And you see DC, who initially came from, and this is just me waxing here and pontificating, prognosticating, but like, it's like you could say that maybe from starting off Greco at a young age, DC did, and then going into the laters and building in a freestyle at the world level, he was able to pick up on those things. So not only can he match, Dan Henderson with the upper body, how is he abusing Dan Henderson in that match? And I know it's an outmatched, outsized Dan Henderson. I'm not taking it too literal, folks. But it's a beautiful match to watch as far as DC wrestling, because you're seeing him in close, the little foot play, the foot trips, and things that he can pull off from that level that were just brilliant. And just just watching his, his flow, the way he parlays the wrestling into striking with that first Stipe Miocic win, as far as giving guys underhooks on purpose or when to take the underhooks, and I know we're not going to be getting too much into a clinch, clinch fighters, but I loved it. And then also with the wrestle boxers, not that DC, I want to limit him to just that stereotype, wrestle boxers in general. And we see it with Stipe, right? They tend to get a single leg snatch. It tends to work really well because you're slipping. It kind of fits into that, that release valve of pressure, if you will. You can kind of slip extra low and snatch a leg if they make a mistake and go close enough, and run the pipe, if you will. And you talked about pipe running. This is where we return to that talk. And we don't see it a lot. We don't see it done well. And sure, maybe there's guys that do it with a cleaner technique than DC does, but I would argue that whatever things you could pick apart technically, I think DC does for a reason. Because I would argue the technique of a snap down, single leg, running the pipe, if you will. I believe that technique alone, much less, especially the way Daniel Cormier does it, encourages a get up that opens up some opportunities in MMA, Ed. As far as people that, unlike Derek Lewis, who know how to tripod. Derek Lewis can make that ski slope, right? He lays the trap. He's like, go on and take my back. And Daniel Cormier was smart. He knows that. He didn't take the bait. He didn't go front headlock to back take. Did he know? He goes high-low. He goes front headlock to ankle pick. He wasn't taking that Derek Lewis trap. However, when he does do single legs, you'll see people the way he almost like turns them in the momentum, he won't follow them to the ground and like sell out that I have to pin him now off of this. He'll let them get up and allow them to open themselves up by getting up, whether he wants to put a leg in there and ride, or ride without the leg, just kind of do a side ride, or take the back. DC is not beyond taking the back. And it's all set up from his wrestling and his understanding of reactions. He can get lazy with certain things, as a lot of the greats and teachers tend to do. Do as I say, not as I do. Right? There's definitely a lot of that with DC, but overall, thematically, it's one of the most fun wrestlers to watch. So he makes my number 2, Justin number 1.
Yeah, I think that's a good shot, and I figure a lot of people would have him on there. I'm just so obsessed with the interplay of how you get to those wrestling situations. I don't think he's always the best at that.
Yes,
that's probably where he falls short. Also, AKA has this habit that makes a lot of their guys basically neutered as far as back foot wrestling. Like if you want to be a reactive shot artist, don't go to AKA because of the way that they teach striking defense. It really puts you out of position. DC still pulls it off a bunch of times where he's in no position to be wrestling with anyone. He has these really dramatic, like sweeps his head all the way under to get to these single legs, and his finishing mechanics and his like footwork on the finishes for those singles, still awesome. Like really nice footwork, like some of the best you'll see. Like those singles he was hitting on like Roy Nelson, those were really beautiful.
Oh yeah.
I did like a little highlight video for all his takedowns in his career when I was writing for MMA Sucka, and like within that article I did a big thing about his credentials. So I have a lot of respect for Cormier's wrestling, and it's very deep. And one of my favorite things he's ever done is he went inside trip from over-unders in Strikeforce. It was against like nobody. They were near the cage. He went inside trip, which is my article today was about how John Jones had used the inside trip to get to a cage position on Machida and fell into the double and then double him off the cage. But DC went trip to the cage, and then as they bounced off the cage, he like pushed him in and let like there was that give when you hit the cage, especially with heavyweights. They bounced off, and on that new momentum of the guy pushing him in, he's like, "Oh, I can push you forward." He lat drops him. So there's this nice inside trip lat drop combo that like you would never see in wrestling because you don't have the cage there. He was doing cool stuff like right away. Like super great chain wrestler, scrambler. Like can keep an exchange going. His understanding of cage wrestling offensively, really good. Defensively, the only time we've really ever seen it against Stipe too, and against Jones after he was super tired already, and he seemed like to lack some awareness of like stance. You know what I mean? His stance was really narrow, and that's why Jones took him down. But I think that was more of a factor of what was happening before that, because they had that like basically 3 rounds of striking before that of him getting kicked in the body. So I don't blame him for not being at his best as a wrestler at that point. But yeah, I think DC is a good shout.
Cool, thanks,
so that's just
man.
why he didn't make mine.
Yeah, all right. And not to push the action along, but let's get to your number 1. Close out the show, man. You're the cleanup hitter. Close out the show.
Cool. Just quick mention to a few of my honorables. I talked about him a lot. Michael Chandler, really, really awesome wrestler in MMA. Great entries on its own, but if he doesn't get his entry, he's really good at like switching off to front headlock and coming back and forth between the shot and intermediate positions and keeping the exchange going and chaining. I think Alvarez, too, is a really good fight to look at for the wrestling of Michael Chandler. Also, just freaky athlete. So big ups. Also, he had that huge back arch on Ben Henderson. You got to love that.
Yep.
Somebody who's, Demetrius Johnson, I really wanted to mention because I wanted to talk about it, but I had too many people to talk about. Just, an artist of getting to those cage doubles as well, and good in open space, obviously, good scrambler. And somebody who does not deserve to be on the list right now, but who I think might be on track to end up being one of the great MMA neutral wrestlers and overall, Peter Yan. He is really coming along as an MMA wrestler. It's weird to say, and I got a friend, Zach Goldrosen, who wrestled at Muhlenberg College in Pennsylvania, and they had someone on the Thai national team who trains at Tiger Muay Thai. And he's been wrestling with Yan, and he's like, this guy got good really fast. So shout out to the Hickmans for training up Peter Yan. And I wrote an article about how he's been incorporating his striking and wrestling together. But that's somebody I want to be able to say on this list eventually. He's just not there quite yet. But yeah, my number 1, I've said this on record before, so it's probably not a surprise to that many people. My number 1 is Jose Aldo, which is probably controversial because he didn't exactly brand himself as a takedown artist. But I mean, when you just consider wrestling from neutral, I think defense is at least half of it. And nobody has ever been better at defense as far as wrestling goes in MMA than Jose Aldo, save for 2 lateral drops, one against Jonathan Brookins and the WC
Oh
against
yeah, I
Marlon
remember that one.
Rice
Yep,
at
yep, yeah.
bantamweight. That made me so angry because I just finished gassing him up as a defensive wrestler against lat drop by Marlon Rice. Anyway, Jose Aldo's defensive systems, amazing, very simple. Basically, just his stance made it so doubling him is very, very hard because he can't really reach his far hip. And just the way that he's able to pivot really favors the lead side hip. So basically, everyone has to finish singles on him.
Yep. And
he was really good at just understanding that I can just raise your single with the whizzer, I can post on your head to create distance, and I can turn and limp leg out. And he did that to everyone. He did that to Frankie Edgar. He did that to Chad Mendes. He did that to everyone. Like, even the people who got, like, 2-second takedowns on him, he did it to them. Like, his defense is incredible. Like, very persistent grip fighting, great urgency, amazing hips, just, like,
his hips
unbelievable.
Are just insane.
Unbelievable. And it's, like, all of this is compounded by him just being a freaky, crazy athlete, like maybe more athletic than Chad Mendes. I might go that far. Possibly one of the best athletes ever in MMA. But
absolutely,
I think what it's just the fact that he's aggressively pursuing all of these very fundamental defensive strategies, and they work like shockingly well. Like, you watch somebody shoot down on him, and it looks like they hit a wall when they hit his hips, and he can shake them off so easily. When he starts fighting the grips, it's like his hands are, a steel grip or something like that. And the way he posts, you're like, oh my God, how strong is he? Just like probably as close to impossible to wrestle as you can get. And in a pure wrestling context, he did score on Chad Mendes. He is the only person to score on Chad Mendes as a wrestler. In their second fight, they go through this crazy scramble of Mendes trying to take him down, and Aldo gets to go behind and reverses him and gets him down and takes him down. So the only person to ever do that in MMA. Pretty much, definitely never held down.
Yes.
Almost never taken down. And when he did actually try to wrestle people, I don't think he ever failed a takedown attempt in his life. He took Mark Hominick down. He doubled him a bunch of times. He took down the Korean Zombie off a body lock, and he took down Ricardo Lamas, and I forget how he did it, but he did take down Ricardo Lamas as well.
Yeah. He did take down Ricardo Lamas. And, he was obviously the person I was hinting at when I was talking about a Brazilian who didn't wrestle. The other one that almost made the list. So I'm really glad I'm surprised he made number 1. Not that I disagree, because again, I'm a defense fan, no matter what sport we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And I apologize if there seems like a rush tone. We usually don't go too far over 2 hours.
I got you.
But I do want to give this pick its due, and I will say one of my favorite instances is in that second Jose Aldo fight, because we could pick instances of him shutting down takedowns all day. But one of my favorite instances is when he was actually taken down by Mendes. And you see this in anybody who's done like jiu-jitsu classes, even in a general class, has probably done this drill, hopefully at least, where you do partner drills and you do side control, take turns on top and bottom. And you do the drill where you essentially, it's a shrimping drill, but you're bucking your hips off the mat as you're pushing their head. We talked about head position being on the opposite side, how that's important. Ed just broke that down. Pushing that head position to the same side, near side, which becomes the weak side and allows you to get up. You're almost using like a brutish collar tie variation and pushing it. And you see Jose Aldo do that left to right hip motion, except he's doing it to Chad Mendes, a guy who, again, if you've been following his career from WC to UFC, when he mat wrestles guys, like you said, he clamps down on them. And you see Jose Aldo just pop, ba-bump, left, right, using that momentum. He only needs to do it like 3 times left to right, and he's back up to his feet. It's one of my favorite instances of his counter wrestling, because he has to actually get up off the mat to do it. But
hey Dan,
what's up? Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Should we address that extremely credentialed wrestlers like Cejudo and Romero are not on this list?
Sure, yeah.
For either of us.
I didn't even write him on my honorable mentions for that reason. I was going to mention Cejudo because of the inside trip, but unless we're talking about inside trips, I don't know what to talk about for Cejudo in wrestling. Not to be a dick. I mean, the guy is a gold medalist, but outside of the inside trip, we haven't really seen much from him.
Yeah, his shot offense is great in a vacuum, but I don't think he has a setup system at all, so he's not getting to his shots that often, and it's just not really there for me. Same with Romero, honestly. He doesn't have a system either, and I've written and talked about that extensively. And as far as defense goes, I suspect he has not trained cage defense
No.
at all.
No, yeah.
So that definitely is minus some points there.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that point up. I didn't expect them to show up on the list. Before we knock out
Yeah.
the rest of the honorable mentions, let's give the listeners their fair shot. They got to get the
Oh yeah, yeah.
first scraps here. Donnie
I'm
Brook
interested.
at Goon Knuckles. He essentially just tweeted a picture of of Mark Schultz there. By the way,
Nice.
I went down like a Dave Schultz like rabbit hole like years ago when that I still haven't watched Foxcatcher, but I watched the Netflix documentary on the Schultz brothers.
Hmm. It's
And
probably better.
I really dug I really dug Dave's like kind of unique creative freestyle, man. He was a fun guy to watch. I don't know from what I saw of his, but he just put the picture of the Schultz brothers. Let me see here. We got a lot of people taking the piss out of Ed, by the way. All your compadres there shitting on your list before it even got out, which is great.
That's on brand.
Yeah, totally. Octavius Rex at the Crunch Man at Crunch the Human on Twitter. Talk about how cool Melendez versus Ishida was.
Gilbert
There's-
Melendez.
Yep, that's a shout there. I had to go back and
Nice.
rewatch it. That is a deep pull, man. Wow.
I don't think I've seen it.
Yeah, no, that's a deep pull from I'm guessing Strikeforce days. Although Gil fought Rumble and The Rock, even a little bit on Pride as far as people paying attention to that. And let me see. Let me get another one here. Magic M MMA at Magic M _ MMA on Twitter. Romero, who we just talked about, his avatar is Romero. So give my man Magic
I saw that.
some slack. GSP, Khabib, folks, don't relax. He's definitely going to be on my mat wrestling. I'm very high.
For sure. For sure.
Cormier, okay, I'm with you there. Tatiana Suarez, good shouts to Tatiana Suarez. I mean, although she's more of a front headlock and mat, I would say, like her front headlock game is mainly her bread and butter. Assuming it means full MMA, we mean not using the fence, I would remove Khabib. Okay, I got you. Fair enough.
Interesting.
Ben Askren didn't make my list for the reason of because again, if we're talking about mat wrestlers, maybe he would be on there, but not just because of the lack of offense, but something we can criticize Cormier for was that entries, right? You know, the entries are for MMA context. Yeah, it's really rough. Before I read the rest of my list off really quickly, do you want to read the rest of your list? Anybody that we didn't mention, Ed?
Oh no, I snuck my honorables in before my number one, so I'm all set.
Cool. I already mentioned Chael Sonnen, but you know, again, a guy just gets after it as far as being effective. Say what you will, he's committed. That's his game, and he has a couple weapons he uses to do it. Carl Parisian, he's a judo guy, of course, but he had some underrated wrestling as well.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Well, you know, if you actually go back and watch his fights, it's not all traditional judo takedowns, folks. Phil Davis, I had to mention him a bit, although he can really range up into mat wrestling as far as wrestlers who took to the mat wrestling goes.
I think so.
I appreciate guys that try to get creative, just like I appreciate guys like Michael Chandler who will put the hooks in and go take it back. Randy Couture's not on this list, but you bet your ass if we're talking about clinch. I mean, dude, you want to talk about striking off the break? It blew me when we were talking about Kamaru Usman, which justly so, and makes me want to see a rematch with him and Leon Edwards that much more. Although I would still favor Usman, I'm just saying I still want to see it. But man, even going back to watch Randy Couture, how he broke not just the typical like underhook punch with one arm, but even when he broke off and stuff, like he was really ahead of his time as far as that goes. I'm not going to keep talking about him. Nurmagomedov. I wrote Zach Makovsky down. You know, I got to give him a shout, especially working off the single leg snatches, right? We talked about that.
I was waiting because I forgot to mention him again because I was like, oh, I already talked about Zach, but I forgot to say that he's definitely an honorable mention. Oh, he's so self-deprecating. He'll be like, oh no, like I can't hold him down. But as far as like taking people down, I don't think I've ever seen him not take someone down that he fought. Nope. So I think he's clearly top 10.
Nope. I mentioned Rashad Evans and gave him credit because he's one of the first guys, you know, when you're doing the head slipping and going into the takedown double legs in the mid to late aughts, that trend. And of course, a guy who beat him as well as Cormier, obviously John Jones. If I would have put John Jones on the list, then that means I would have to put him above Cormier. Then I'm really playing to the MMA math. But don't worry, John Jones will be very high, let's just say, on the clinch wrestling or the clinch fighting list in general. Fair enough. So that's it. We're going to get out of here. We're already over on time, but that's not a bad thing, Ed. It means this was a fun episode. You did a great job. And hopefully, most importantly, the listeners came away with some new information and new fights that they want to watch, right?
Hope so.
I hope so too. All right. Again, reminder: find Ed Gallo there at Edward Gallo MMA on Twitter, where you can find all his work from the fight site and onward. Me at Dan Tom MMA. Of course, this podcast, if you're still listening, hosted by MixedMartialAnalyst.com, where you can go to support the show because this is free. My breakdowns, all this stuff, all free, and you can go support it there. You can go on it. Amazon, we're all using those, right? Get your proteins, get whatever the heck you're going to get from Amazon. You click through MixedMartialAnalyst.com first, and you're able to get whatever you need and support the podcast at a no percentage. There's also a donation link if you want to go straight up that way. But I'm a bad businessman, so I'm not going to make you do it. Thank you for joining us on YouTube. If you're there, subscribe to the channel. Give us the 5-star ratings and review on Apple Podcasts if you're listening on the old iTunes. Thanks again, Ed. Any last words before we get out of here?
Yeah, support the fight site. We're still growing. Give us your money also because we need it. Thank you.
Hey, no, serious note though, support the work in any way you can, whether it's, even if you can't afford like clicks or shares, like anything. They really do good work there. They deserve it. Even if you can do, whether it's a couple bucks to sharing, you won't regret it. I really respect the work you guys do, and not just you guys, just in general. I mean, you talk about people wanting to get their start as far as that goes, and this and that. Like, you guys are complaining about like quote unquote clickbait or what stuff like the bigger sites put out. Well, I'm a part of some of those bigger sites, and I see some of the analytics, and again, the best way you can vote, folks, is with your dollars and or clicks in this case. So support good stuff like that. Stay safe out there. Wash your hands and always protect your neck.